Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The moment I accepted his offer of help, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. His eyes, once kind, now gleamed with a predatory intensity that made my blood run cold. As we drove deeper into the night, I realized this stranger was taking me somewhere I might never return from. It had been a long day and I was exhausted. The conference in Atlanta had run late, and I decided to drive back to Charleston rather than spend another night in a hotel. Big mistake. The rain started about an hour into my trip. A light drizzle at first, but it quickly turned into a torrential downpour. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The wipers were going full speed, but they barely made a difference. The headlights of oncoming cars created a blinding glare on the wet road. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. Just a bit further, I muttered to myself, "You can make it, Sarah." That's when I heard it. A sputtering sound from the engine, followed by a series of alarming clanks. The car jerked and shuddered. "No, no, no," I pleaded, easing off the gas. "Don't do this to me." But my old Toyota had other plans. The engine made one final, pathetic cough before dying completely. I coasted to the shoulder, hazard lights blinking weakly in the darkness. I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain hammer against the roof. The reality of my situation sank in. I was alone on a deserted stretch of highway, miles from the nearest town, with a dead car and no cell service. "Okay, Sarah," I said aloud, trying to calm my racing heart. "Think. What are your options?" I could wait for someone to drive by, but at this time of night, in this weather, that could take hours. I could try to walk to the nearest gas station or house, but I had no idea how far that might be. Neither option seemed particularly appealing. Just as I was weighing the pros and cons of each, a pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. My heart leapt. Maybe my luck was changing. The car slowed as it approached, eventually pulling up behind me. I watched in the mirror as the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up against the rain. I cracked my window as he approached, rain immediately spraying inside. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. I nodded. "Yeah, it just died on me." "I don't suppose you know anything about cars?" He chuckled. "I know enough to know when one's beyond roadside repair. Looks like you could use a ride." I hesitated. Every instinct told me not to get in a car with a stranger, but what choice did I have? "I don't want to trouble you," I said, even as relief flooded through me. "No trouble at all," he replied, flashing a warm smile. "I'm headed to Charleston myself. It'll be a pleasure to help a damsel in distress." Something about the way he said damsel in distress made me pause, but I brushed it off. He seemed nice enough, and I was desperate to get out of this situation. "That would be amazing. Thank you," I said, grabbing my purse and phone. He opened the passenger door of his sedan for me, and I dashed through the rain to get in. The interior was warm and dry, a stark contrast to the storm raging outside. "I'm Sarah," I said as he got in the driver's seat. "Nice to meet you, Sarah. I'm Jack," he replied, starting the engine. "Let's get you home, shall we?" As we pulled back onto the highway, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Crisis averted. I'd be home soon, safe and sound. We drove in silence for a few minutes, the rhythmic swish of the wipers the only sound. I glanced at Jack, taking in his profile. He was older than I'd initially thought, probably in his late 40s. His hair was graying at the temples and there were deep lines around his eyes. "So, what brings you out on a night like this?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Jack's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Oh, you know, Just heading home after a long trip. What do you do? He paused before answering. I'm in sales. Medical equipment. Something about his tone made me uneasy. It sounded rehearsed, like he'd said it many times before. I turned my attention to the road ahead, trying to get my bearings. We should have been approaching the outskirts of Charleston by now, but the landscape outside was unfamiliar. Dense forest pressed in on both sides of the highway. Are you sure this is the right way? I asked, trying to keep the worry out of my voice. Jack glanced at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. It's a shortcut. Trust me. I know these roads like the back of my hand. I nodded, but the uneasiness in my stomach grew. I pulled out my phone, hoping to check our location, but there was still no signal. So, Sarah, Jack said, his voice taking on a different tone. What's a pretty girl like you doing traveling alone? The question sent a chill down my spine. I shifted in my seat, suddenly very aware of how close we were in the confined space of the car. Oh, you know, work stuff, I replied vaguely. My husband's waiting for me at home. It was a lie, but I hoped it might deter any unsavory intentions. Jack chuckled, a low, mirthless sound that made my skin crawl. Now, Sarah, we both know that's not true. My heart started racing. How could he know? I tried to keep my voice steady. What do you mean? He turned to look at me then, and the expression on his face made my blood run cold. His eyes, which had seemed kind when he first approached my car, now gleamed with a predatory intensity. You really should be more careful about what you post on social media, he said, his voice dripping with mock concern. All those posts about being a strong, independent woman. How you don't need a man to complete you. It makes you an easy target. Panic surged through me. He'd been stalking me online. This wasn't a chance encounter. He'd been waiting for an opportunity like this. I reached for the door handle, ready to jump out of the moving car if necessary. But Jack was quicker. He hit the central locking button, the sound of the locks engaging echoing in the quiet car like a death knell. Now, he said, his voice sickeningly sweet. Let's not do anything rash. We're going to have a nice little chat, you and I. I looked out the window, desperately searching for any signs of civilization, but we were deep in the woods now. The rain continued to pour, obscuring everything beyond the reach of the headlights. Where are you taking me? I demanded, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Jack smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Somewhere quiet, somewhere we won't be disturbed. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. I considered grabbing the steering wheel, forcing us off the road, but at this speed, it would likely kill us both. Please, I said, hating the pleading note in my voice. Just let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear. He laughed then, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. Oh, Sarah, you're not going anywhere. You see, I've been watching you for a long time, waiting for the perfect moment, and here we are. Tears welled up in my eyes as the full horror of my situation sank in. I thought about my family, my friends. Would they ever know what happened to me? Just then, I saw something that made my heart leap. The glow of lights in the distance. A gas station or maybe a small town. If I could just get someone's attention. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. It was risky, possibly suicidal, but it was my only chance. In one swift motion, I unbuckled my seatbelt, grabbed the steering wheel, and yanked it hard to the right. Jack shouted in surprise as the car swerved violently. We spun off the road, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. There was a moment of weightlessness as we went airborne, then a sickening crunch as we hit the ground. The world spun, glass shattered, and metal screamed. When everything finally stopped moving, I was upside down, held in place by my seatbelt. Dazed and in pain, I forced myself to focus. I had to get out before Jack recovered. I fumbled with the seatbelt release, my fingers slick with blood. Finally, it gave way, and I crashed onto the roof of the overturned car, ignoring the pain shooting through my body. I crawled towards the shattered window. As I pulled myself out of the wreckage, I heard Jack groan. He was alive. Adrenaline surging through me. I staggered to my feet and started running towards the lights I'd seen. The rain was still pouring, soaking me to the bone, but I didn't care. I just ran, my feet slipping in the mud, branches whipping at my face. Behind me, I heard Jack's voice, filled with rage. "Sarah, you can't run from me." His words spurred me on. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life, driven by pure terror and the will to survive. The lights grew closer. I could make out the shape of buildings now. A small town just off the highway. As I burst out of the tree line, I saw a gas station. The attendant, a young man, was outside, staring in shock at my battered, mud-covered form. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. "Please, help me!" He rushed towards me, already pulling out his phone. As he dialed 911, I collapsed to the ground, the adrenaline finally wearing off. I looked back at the dark woods I'd emerged from, half expecting to see Jack's menacing figure. But there was nothing. As I heard sirens in the distance, a hysterical laugh bubbled up from my chest. I was alive. I had survived. But as the police cars pulled up and officers rushed towards me, I knew one thing for certain. I would never accept a ride from a stranger again. The chanting grew louder as I crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, my heart pounding in my chest. What I'd stumbled upon in these remote woods was beyond anything I could have imagined. As the villagers gathered in the moonlit clearing, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly fervor, I realized I might never make it out of this hidden community alive. It had started as a simple hiking trip, a chance to clear my head after a messy breakup and the stress of losing my job. I'd always found solace in nature, and the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest seemed like the perfect place to lose myself for a while. I'd been on the trail for 3 days, relishing the solitude and the crisp mountain air. The world of deadlines and heartbreak felt a million miles away as I trekked through towering pines and across babbling brooks. On the 4th day, I noticed something odd. The trail, which had been well maintained up to this point, suddenly became overgrown and difficult to follow. I consulted my map, but according to it, I should have been on a clear path. "Must be an old edition," I muttered to myself, folding the map and stuffing it back into my pack. I pressed on, bushwhacking through the undergrowth. The forest seemed to grow denser, the trees pressing in closer, their branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the sunlight. An uneasy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach, but I ignored it. I was an experienced hiker. I could handle a little detour. As the day wore on, my unease grew. The forest was eerily quiet. No bird song, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Just the sound of my own breathing and the crunch of leaves under my boots. I was about to turn back when I saw it, a flash of color through the trees. Something that didn't belong in the sea of green and brown. I moved closer, pushing aside a low-hanging branch, and gasped. There, nestled in a small valley, was a village. But not like any village I'd ever seen before. The buildings were a hodgepodge of styles. Some looked like they belonged in medieval Europe. Others resembled Native American longhouses, and still others were constructed of materials I couldn't even identify. I blinked hard. Sure, I must be hallucinating. There was no way a village like this could exist out here, miles from any road or town. But as I watched, I saw movement. People going about their daily lives, dressed in an odd assortment of clothing that seemed to span centuries. Curiosity overcame caution, and I found myself moving closer, drawn by the mystery of this impossible place. As I approached the outskirts of the village, a young woman looked up from the garden she was tending. Our eyes met, and for a moment, everything froze. Then she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. "Welcome, traveler," she said, her voice musical and strangely accented. It's been a long time since we've had a visitor from the outside world. I stammered out a greeting, still trying to process what I was seeing. The woman, who introduced herself as Arya, seemed unfazed by my confusion. She invited me into the village, promising food and rest. Against my better judgment, I followed her. The village was even stranger up close. The air hummed with an energy I couldn't explain, and the villagers all turned to stare as I passed. Their eyes were odd, too bright, almost feverish. Arya led me to a large building in the center of the village. Inside, a group of elders sat in a circle, their faces lined with age but their eyes as bright as the younger villagers. "Elders," Arya said, bowing slightly. "I brought a visitor from the outside." The elders regarded me with a mixture of curiosity and something else. Hunger, anticipation. I couldn't quite place it, but it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Welcome," one of the elders said, his voice creaky with age. "It's been many years since we've had new blood in our community." The way he said new blood sent a chill down my spine. They asked me questions about the outside world, seeming particularly interested in technology and current events. I answered as best I could, but my mind was reeling. How long had these people been isolated out here? And why? As night fell, the village came alive with activity. Bonfires were lit, and the villagers gathered in the central square. The air thrummed with excitement, and I could hear whispers of the ceremony and the choosing. Arya found me watching from the sidelines. "Come," she said, taking my hand. "You must join us for the celebration." Her grip was surprisingly strong as she pulled me into the crowd. The villagers pressed in around us, their eyes glinting in the firelight. Someone pressed a cup into my hand, a thick, dark liquid that smelled sweet and metallic. "Drink," Arya urged. "It's part of the ceremony." I raised the cup to my lips, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way the villagers were watching me, their eyes hungry and expectant. Or maybe it was the sudden, overwhelming feeling that if I drank, something irreversible would happen. I pretended to take a sip, then lowered the cup. "It's interesting," I said, trying to smile. "What exactly are we celebrating?" Arya's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "The choosing, of course. And you, dear visitor, have been chosen." The crowd surged forward, hands grabbing at me from all sides. I stumbled backward, the cup falling from my hand and spilling its contents on the ground. Where the liquid touched, the earth seemed to writhe and bubble. Panic seized me, and I did the only thing I could. I ran. I burst out of the crowd, sprinting for the edge of the village. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the pounding of feet. The villagers were giving chase. I plunged into the dark forest, branches whipping at my face as I ran blindly through the undergrowth. The sounds of pursuit were close behind, and occasionally I caught glimpses of torchlight through the trees. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead. But terror kept me moving. I had no idea where I was going. My only thought was to put as much distance between myself and the village as possible. After what felt like hours, the sounds of pursuit faded. I slowed to a stop, gasping for breath, and looked around. The forest was pitch black, the trees looming like silent sentinels all around me. I was hopelessly lost. A twig snapped nearby, and I whirled around, heart pounding. Was it an animal, or had the villagers found me? I crouched behind a fallen log, trying to quiet my breathing. In the distance, I could hear chanting, a low, rhythmic sound that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The chanting grew louder, and I saw the flicker of torchlight through the trees. They were coming. And that's how I found myself here, hiding behind this crumbling stone wall. The remains of some ancient structure, half reclaimed by the forest. The villagers had gathered in a clearing just beyond, their chanting reaching a fever pitch. I peered over the wall, curiosity warring with fear. What I saw made my blood run cold. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with what I prayed wasn't blood. The elders stood around it, their arms raised to the sky. And there, laid out on the altar, was Arya. She wasn't struggling. In fact, she seemed to be in some kind of trance, her eyes wide and unfocused, a beatific smile on her face. One of the elders raised a knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. The chanting reached a crescendo. I couldn't watch, I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, my mind unable to process the horror unfolding before me. The knife plunged down, and Arya's body arched off the altar. But instead of blood, a blinding light erupted from the wound. It shot into the sky like a beacon, and the ground began to tremble beneath my feet. The villagers fell to their knees, arms outstretched towards the light. And then, to my utter disbelief, Arya sat up. She looked different. Her skin glowed with an inner light, and her eyes were pools of liquid silver. She turned her head, and for a moment, our eyes met across the clearing. A smile spread across her face, not the warm, welcoming smile from earlier, but something ancient and knowing and utterly inhuman. In that moment, I understood this wasn't just a village lost in time. It was something much older, much stranger. A place where the veil between worlds was thin, where ancient rituals still held power, and they wanted me to be a part of it. As if reading my thoughts, Arya raised her hand, beckoning to me. The villagers turned as one, their eyes finding me in my hiding place. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran through the night, branches tearing at my clothes, roots threatening to trip me at every step. I ran until my legs gave out and I collapsed, gasping for breath. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, I found myself on a familiar trail. Somehow, impossibly, I had made it back to the main hiking path. I staggered down the mountain, jumping at every sound, convinced that at any moment the villagers would emerge from the trees to drag me back, but they never came. I made it back to civilization, but the memory of that night haunts me still. Sometimes when I'm walking in the woods, I think I hear chanting on the wind, and sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of silver eyes watching me from the shadows. I never told anyone what happened. Who would believe me? But I know the truth. Somewhere deep in those mountains, hidden from the world, there's a village where ancient powers still hold sway, and they're always looking for new blood. The muffled sound of voices echoed through the dark, empty warehouse. My heart raced as I peered around a stack of crates, my flashlight trembling in my hand. What I saw in that moment would change my life forever. A group of armed men, surrounded by stacks of illegal goods, plotting their next move. I was just a night security guard, but in that instant, I became an unwitting witness to a dangerous criminal operation. I never thought my job would lead me into anything remotely exciting. Night security at Midwest Distribution Center was about as mundane as it gets. Most nights, I'd make my rounds, check the locks, and then park myself in front of the security monitors with a thermos of coffee and whatever paperback I was working through that week. My name's Mike, and I'd been working here for about 3 years. It was a decent gig, quiet, predictable, and it paid the bills. Plus, the solitude gave me time to work on my novel. I was about halfway through the first draft of what I hoped would be the next great American crime thriller. Little did I know, I was about to get a crash course in real-life criminal activity. It was a Tuesday night, or rather Wednesday morning, about 2 a.m. I'd just finished my first round of the warehouse and was heading back to the security office when I heard it. A faint noise, barely audible, coming from the north wing of the building. Now the north wing was supposed to be empty. It was a new addition to the warehouse, not yet in use. We weren't even storing anything there yet. So, any noise coming from that direction was definitely out of the ordinary. I paused, straining my ears. There it was again. A soft thud, followed by what sounded like muffled voices. Probably just some local kids breaking in for a thrill, I muttered to myself, trying to quell the unease rising in my gut. It wouldn't be the first time some teenagers had tried to sneak in for a game of hide and seek or to spray paint some walls. I grabbed my flashlight and headed towards the north wing, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. As I got closer, the voices became clearer. These weren't the high-pitched, excited whispers of teenagers. These were low, gruff voices, men's voices. I slowed my pace, moving as quietly as I could. The voices were coming from behind a large stack of empty crates near the back of the wing. I crept closer, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they must be able to hear it. Peering around the crates, I felt my blood run cold. There, in a cleared space, were 5 men. But these weren't ordinary intruders. They were armed to the teeth, each carrying what looked like military-grade weapons. Surrounding them were stacks of crates. But unlike the empty ones scattered around the warehouse, these were clearly full. Some were open, revealing packages wrapped in plastic. Drugs, I realized with a jolt. One of the men, a tall, muscular guy with a scar running down his left cheek, seemed to be in charge. He was pointing at a map spread out on one of the crates, talking in low, urgent tones. "The shipment needs to be out by Friday," Scarface was saying. "Martinez is getting antsy. Says the heat's coming down hard in Chicago." Another man, shorter but just as muscular, nodded. "We'll have it out. But we need to be careful. That security guard could be a problem." I felt my heart skip a beat. They were talking about me. Scarface waved a dismissive hand. "He's not a problem, just some rent-a-cop who spends most of his time reading. He never comes to this part of the warehouse." I had to bite my tongue to keep from letting out a hysterical laugh. If only they knew. Still, the shorter man insisted. "We should take care of him, just to be safe." Scarface considered this for a moment, then nodded. "All right, tomorrow night. Make it look like an accident." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. This was no small-time operation. This was big, organized crime, big, and they were planning to kill me. I needed to get out of there to call the police. But as I turned to leave, my elbow knocked against one of the empty crates. The sound, though small, seemed to echo through the warehouse like a gunshot. The men's heads snapped up, their conversation cutting off abruptly. "What was that?" one of them hissed. "Oh, check it out," Scarface ordered, reaching for his weapon. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, no longer caring about stealth. I could hear shouts behind me, followed by the sound of pursuing footsteps. I sprinted through the warehouse, weaving between shelves and stacks of inventory. I knew the layout like the back of my hand. It was my only advantage. A shot rang out, the bullet whistling past my ear and embedding itself in a nearby crate. I ducked instinctively, nearly losing my footing. I rounded a corner and spotted the security office ahead. If I could just make it there, I could lock myself in and call for help. Another shot, closer this time. I put on a burst of speed, my lungs burning. I reached the office door, fumbling with my keys. Behind me, I could hear the men getting closer. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. Finally, the door opened. I dove inside, slamming it shut behind me and turning the deadbolt just as the first man reached it. He slammed into the door, the impact shaking the entire room. I scrambled for the phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice was like a lifeline. "This is Mike Johnson, night security at Midwest Distribution Center." I gasped out. "There are armed men in the warehouse. They're trying to kill me. Please, send help." "Stay calm, sir. We're dispatching units to your location now." "Are you in a secure location?" "Yes, I'm locked in the security office. But I don't know how long the door will hold." The men were shouting outside, trying to break down the door. Each impact sent a jolt of terror through me. "Help is on the way, Mr. Johnson. Stay on the line with me." I clutched the phone like a lifeline, my eyes fixed on the shuddering door. The men outside were growing more frantic, their shouts more desperate. Then, miraculously, I heard it. Sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. The men heard it too. Their assault on the door stopped abruptly. "Cops!" one of them yelled. "We gotta get out of here." I heard the sound of retreating footsteps, then silence. The next few hours passed in a blur. The police arrived, securing the warehouse and taking my statement. They found the crates of drugs, along with weapons and documents detailing a vast distribution network. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the warehouse windows, a detective approached me. "Mr. Johnson, you've uncovered a major drug trafficking operation. The men you saw are part of a cartel we've been trying to pin down for months." I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "We're going to need to place you in protective custody," the detective continued, "at least until we can round up all the players in this operation." And just like that, my life changed forever. No more quiet nights at the warehouse, no more working on my novel in peace. As I was led to a waiting police car, I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. I'd spent months trying to write the perfect crime thriller, and now I was living one. The detective gave me an odd look. "Something funny, Mr. Johnson?" I shook my head, just thinking about how life can change in an instant. One minute you're a nobody security guard, the next you're at the center of a major drug bust. He patted me on the shoulder. "Well, you're not a nobody anymore. You're a hero." A hero. The word echoed in my mind as we drove away from the warehouse. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt scared, exhausted, and more than a little overwhelmed. But as the adrenaline began to wear off, another feeling started to creep in: excitement. I'd seen firsthand the kind of high-stakes situation I'd been trying to write about. I'd faced down armed criminals and lived to tell the tale. As we pulled up to the police station, I realized something. I might have lost my quiet job and my peaceful nights, but I'd gained something too. I'd gained a story, a real, honest-to-God, pulse-pounding story. And isn't that what every writer dreams of? The sound of breaking glass shattered the peaceful night, jolting me awake. Before I could react, rough hands grabbed me, a voice hissing, "Don't make a sound." In that moment, our idyllic family getaway transformed into a nightmarish struggle for survival. We had been looking forward to this vacation for months. My wife, Sarah, our 2 kids, Emma, 10, and Jack, 8, and I had rented a cozy cabin nestled in the woods of upstate New York. It was supposed to be a chance to disconnect from our hectic city lives, to reconnect as a family. No phones, no internet, just us and nature. The first 2 days had been perfect. We'd hiked trails, roasted marshmallows, and told stories around the campfire. The kids had squealed with delight when we spotted a family of deer on our nature walk. Sarah and I had shared quiet moments on the porch, watching the sun set behind the trees, feeling more relaxed than we had in years. It was our 3rd night at the cabin. We'd had a big day of exploring and everyone was exhausted. Sarah and I tucked the kids into their bunk beds, kissing them goodnight before retiring to our own room. As I drifted off to sleep, I remember thinking how lucky we were to have this time together. The sound of breaking glass jolted me awake. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar shadows of the cabin bedroom adding to my confusion. Then I heard it, heavy footsteps, multiple sets moving through the cabin. Sarah stirred beside me. "Tom, what was that?" Before I could answer, our bedroom door burst open. 3 men stood there, dressed in dark clothes, their faces obscured by ski masks. The one in front held a gun, pointing it directly at us. "Don't move," he growled. "Don't make a sound." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Sarah's hand found mine under the covers, squeezing tight. "Please," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "Our children are here. Don't hurt them." The man with the gun jerked his head, and one of his companions left the room. I heard the door to the kids' room open, and my blood ran cold. "Daddy," Emma's scared voice carried down the hall. "It's okay, sweetheart," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything's going to be okay." The man with the gun stepped closer, his eyes cold behind the mask. You'd better hope so. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to do exactly what we say, when we say it. If you cooperate, no one gets hurt. If you don't, he let the threat hang in the air. The other man returned, herding Emma and Jack in front of him. The kids looked terrified, their eyes wide with fear. "Mommy," Jack whimpered. Sarah held out her arms and the kids ran to her, burying their faces in her embrace. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to sound calm for the sake of my family. "Money," the leader said bluntly. "Jewels, electronics, anything valuable. You city folks come up here, thinking you're safe in your little cabins, but you bring all your expensive toys with you." I almost laughed at the irony. We'd left most of our electronics at home, wanting to fully disconnect. The only things of value we had were our phones and Sarah's wedding ring. "We don't have much with us," I said carefully, "but you're welcome to whatever we have." The leader's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. Rich folks like you always have something stashed away. A safe, maybe. Hidden cash." I shook my head. "I swear we don't." The crack of his hand across my face cut me off. Sarah gasped, and the kids started crying. "Daddy," Emma sobbed. "I'm okay, sweetie," I said, tasting blood in my mouth. "It's okay." The leader grabbed my shirt, pulling me close. "Last chance. Where's the money?" In that moment, looking into his eyes, I realized these men were desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. "Okay," I said, thinking quickly. "Okay, there's a safe. In the living room, behind the painting of the lake." It was a lie, of course. There was no safe. But I needed to buy us some time, to find a way out of this nightmare. The leader nodded to one of his men, who left the room. We could hear him in the living room, moving furniture. "For your sake, you'd better not be lying," the leader growled. The minutes ticked by, feeling like hours. The man in the living room was getting frustrated. I could tell by the increasing sounds of destruction. "There's no safe," he finally shouted. The leader's eyes flashed with rage. He raised his gun, pointing it at Sarah and the kids. "No," I shouted, throwing myself in front of them. "Please, I'm sorry. I'll give you anything, everything we have. Just please, don't hurt them." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, suddenly, a sound broke the silence. A car engine coming up the drive. The intruders froze. "Who the hell is that?" The leader hissed. I had no idea. We weren't expecting anyone. The cabin was isolated, the nearest neighbor miles away. The leader grabbed me, pressing the gun to my head. "Get rid of them," he ordered. "And if you try anything, your family dies." He shoved me toward the door. I stumbled out onto the porch, blinking in the glare of headlights. A car had pulled up, and a figure was getting out. "Hey there," a cheerful voice called out. As my eyes adjusted, I recognized Bob, the property manager who had checked us in. "Sorry to bother you folks so late. Left my toolbox here earlier when I was fixing that leak. Thought I'd swing by and grab it since I need it for a job in the morning." I stood there, my mind racing. This could be our chance, but one wrong move and my family would pay the price. Hey Bob," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now's not a great time. We're all in bed. Could you come back in the morning?" Bob frowned, taking a step closer. "You okay there, Tom? You're looking a bit roughed up." I felt the barrel of the gun press into my back. The leader had followed me out, staying hidden behind the door. "I'm fine," I said quickly. Just, tripped in the dark. Clumsy me." Bob didn't look convinced. He took another step forward, and I saw his eyes widen as he spotted the man behind me. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Bob reached for something in his car. A gun, I realized with shock. The leader shoved me aside, raising his own weapon. 2 shots rang out in quick succession. I hit the ground hard, my ears ringing from the gunshots. When I looked up, Bob was on the ground, but so was the leader, both men groaning in pain. I didn't hesitate. I lunged for the leader's dropped gun, scooping it up and running back into the cabin. The other two intruders were in the living room, looking confused and scared. "Get out!" I roared, pointing the gun at them. "Now!" They hesitated for a moment, then bolted for the door. I heard their footsteps pounding down the porch steps, then the sound of them crashing through the underbrush as they fled into the woods. I ran to the bedroom. Sarah was huddled in the corner with the kids, all three of them crying. "It's okay," I said, dropping to my knees beside them. "It's over. We're safe." Sarah threw her arms around me, sobbing with relief. Emma and Jack piled on, and for a moment, we just held each other, grateful to be alive and together. The next few hours passed in a blur. The police arrived, then ambulances. Bob, it turned out, was an off-duty cop who worked security for the rental company on the side. His quick thinking and bravery had saved us. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the cabin, a detective approached us. "We've apprehended all three men," he said. "They were part of a gang that's been targeting vacation rentals in the area. Thanks to you folks, we've been able to shut down their entire operation." I nodded, too exhausted to feel anything but relief. "You were very brave," the detective continued. "Not many people would have kept their cool in a situation like that." I looked at Sarah and the kids, who had finally fallen asleep on a couch provided by the paramedics. "I had to," I said simply. "They're my whole world." As we drove away from the cabin later that day, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly life can change. We had come seeking peace and connection, and instead found terror and violence. But we had also found strength we didn't know we had, a bond that couldn't be broken. Our perfect family getaway had turned into a nightmare, but we had survived. And in the end, that's what mattered. We were together, we were safe, and we were headed home. The moment I stepped into that dingy motel room, I knew something was terribly wrong. The air felt thick with secrets, and the walls seemed to whisper warnings. Little did I know, I had just checked into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was supposed to be a simple overnight stay. I was on a cross-country road trip, trying to clear my head after a messy breakup. The plan was to drive from New York to California, stopping at random places along the way. No itinerary, no reservations, just me, my beat-up Honda, and the open road. I'd been driving for about 12 hours straight when I saw the neon sign of the Starlight Motel flickering in the distance. It was nearly midnight, and my eyes were starting to droop. The motel looked a bit run down, but I was too exhausted to care. All I wanted was a bed and a few hours of sleep before hitting the road again. The parking lot was nearly empty when I pulled in, just a couple of trucks and an old station wagon. The office was a small, dimly lit room that smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. Behind the desk sat an old man, his roomy eyes fixed on a small TV playing some late-night infomercial. "Need a room," I said, stifling a yawn. The old man looked up, his gaze unsettlingly intense. "Just you?" he asked, his voice raspy. I nodded, suddenly feeling a bit uneasy. There was something off about the way he was looking at me, like he was sizing me up. $40, he said, sliding a key across the desk. "Room 13. I hesitated for a moment. Room 13? Really? But I was too tired to care about silly superstitions. I handed over the cash, grabbed the key, and headed out to find my room. The motel was L-shaped, with 2 floors of rooms surrounding a small, empty pool. My room was on the ground floor, at the far end of the building. As I walked, I noticed that most of the rooms seemed to be dark and vacant. The few that showed signs of life had their curtains tightly drawn. I reached room 13 and unlocked the door, wincing at the loud creak of the hinges. The room was small and sparse, a double bed with a faded floral comforter, a rickety desk, and an ancient TV bolted to the wall. The bathroom was tiny, with cracked tiles and a shower that looked like it had seen better days. But it was a place to sleep, and that's all I cared about at that moment. I dropped my bag on the floor, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the bed. Despite my exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. The bed was lumpy, and there was a strange, rhythmic thumping sound coming from the room next door. I tossed and turned for what felt like hours, drifting in and out of a fitful sleep. At some point in the night, I was jolted awake by a scream. It was muffled, as if coming from far away, but unmistakably a cry of terror. I sat up, my heart pounding, and listened intently. But all I could hear now was the distant hum of traffic from the highway. Had I dreamed it? I wasn't sure. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:17 a.m. I got up, my legs shaky, and peeked out through the curtains. The parking lot was still empty except for the same vehicles I'd seen earlier. Everything seemed quiet and still. I was about to go back to bed when I noticed something strange. A figure was standing at the far end of the parking lot, partially hidden in the shadows. It was too dark to make out any details, but I could tell it was a man, and he seemed to be staring directly at my room. A chill ran down my spine. I let the curtain fall back into place and retreated to the bed, my mind racing. Who was that? Was he watching me? And what was that scream I'd heard? Sleep was impossible now. I sat on the edge of the bed, every nerve on high alert. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. At one point, I heard footsteps outside my door. They paused for a moment, then continued on. As soon as the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, ready to get the hell out of there. But when I tried to turn the handle, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked from the outside. Panic surged through me. I yanked on the handle, then pounded on the door, shouting for help, but there was no response. The room suddenly felt like a cage, the walls closing in around me. I rushed to the window, thinking I could climb out, but it was sealed shut. In desperation, I grabbed the desk chair and smashed it against the window. The glass cracked but didn't break. That's when I heard it. Footsteps approaching my room. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The lock clicked, and the door slowly swung open. It was the old man from the front desk, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two burly men with cold, dead eyes. Now, the old man said, his voice sickeningly sweet. There's no need for all this fuss. We just want to have a little chat with you. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room for anything I could use as a weapon. What do you want? I managed to choke out. The old man's face twisted into a cruel smile. Oh, it's not about what we want. It's about what our clients want. And they're always looking for fresh merchandise. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a rundown motel. It was a front for something much darker, much more sinister. One of the burly men stepped forward, reaching for me. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I grabbed the lamp from the nightstand and swung it with all my might. It connected with his head with a sickening thud, and he stumbled backward. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I bolted for the door, shoving past the old man. I could hear shouts behind me as I ran, my bare feet slapping against the cold concrete of the walkway. I ran without direction, without thought, my only goal to get as far away from that place as possible. I ended up in the parking lot, frantically looking around for my car. But it was gone. They must have moved it. The sound of pursuing footsteps spurred me on. I ran towards the highway, my lungs burning, my heart feeling like it might explode. Cars whizzed by, their headlights momentarily illuminating the darkness. I waved my arms frantically, trying to flag someone down. But no one stopped. To them, I must have looked like a madwoman, barefoot, in pajamas, running along the side of the highway. I don't know how long I ran. It felt like hours. Eventually, I saw lights up ahead, a truck stop. I staggered into the brightly lit parking lot, collapsing onto the pavement. The next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed. The police were there, asking questions. I told them everything about the motel, the old man, the locked door. They listened patiently, exchanging glances that I couldn't quite read. Later, I found out the truth. The Starlight Motel had been on their radar for months, suspected of being part of a human trafficking ring. My escape and subsequent report had given them the probable cause they needed to raid the place. They found evidence of horrific crimes, hidden rooms, restraints, drugs used for sedation. But the old man and his accomplices were gone, having fled shortly after my escape. My car was found abandoned a few miles down the highway. The investigation is ongoing, but I know I'll never feel completely safe again. Every motel, every stranger, every darkened room now holds the potential for danger. The trauma of that night has left scars that may never fully heal. But I'm one of the lucky ones. I got out, I survived. And if telling my story can help prevent others from falling into the same trap, then maybe some good can come from this nightmare. So if you're ever driving late at night and see a flickering neon sign offering cheap rooms, think twice before you stop. Because you never know what secrets might be hiding behind those closed doors. The moment I saw his eyes in the rearview mirror, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. What started as an act of kindness on a stormy night had turned into a fight for survival, with my own car becoming a prison on wheels. It was supposed to be a quick trip, just a 4-hour drive from Portland to Seattle for a job interview. I'd done the route dozens of times, but never in weather like this. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I'd been white-knuckling the steering wheel for the past hour, my eyes strained from trying to make out the road lines. I was considering pulling over to wait out the storm when I saw him. A lone figure on the side of the road, thumb out, completely drenched. In any other circumstance, I would have driven right by. My mom's voice echoed in my head, warning me about the dangers of picking up strangers. But something made me slow down. Maybe it was the way he was hunched against the rain, looking utterly defeated. Or maybe it was because I could easily imagine myself in his position, desperate for a ride in this godforsaken weather. Whatever the reason, I found myself pulling onto the shoulder, my hazard lights blinking in the gloom. I rolled down the passenger window just enough to hear him over the pounding rain. "Where you headed?" I called out. "Seattle," he replied, his voice barely audible over the storm. My car broke down a few miles back. I'd be forever grateful for a ride." I hesitated for a moment, my instincts warring with my desire to help. Finally, I made a decision I'd soon regret. "Hop in," I said, unlocking the doors. He climbed in quickly, bringing with him the smell of rain and something else I couldn't quite place. As he settled into the seat, I got my first good look at him. He was younger than I expected, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and intense blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Thanks, man," he said, flashing me a grateful smile. "You're a lifesaver." I nodded, pulling back onto the highway. "No problem. I'm Alex, by the way." "Jack," he replied. "Nice to meet you, Alex." We drove in silence for a while, the rhythmic swish of the wipers the only sound. I kept sneaking glances at Jack, trying to get a read on him. He seemed harmless enough, just a guy down on his luck. "So, what brings you to Seattle?" I asked, trying to break the tension. Jack shifted in his seat, his eyes darting to me and then back to the road. "Oh, work stuff. What about you?" "Job interview," I replied. "Tech company downtown." He nodded, but I noticed his hands were fidgeting in his lap. Cool. Hey, do you mind if we make a quick stop? I'm dying for a smoke." I frowned. We'd only been driving for about 20 minutes. "Can't it wait? This weather's pretty brutal." Jack's demeanor changed instantly. His friendly smile disappeared, replaced by a hard, cold look. I said, "Pull over." That's when I saw it, the glint of metal in his hand, a knife. My heart started racing, adrenaline flooding my system. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind frantically trying to process what was happening. "Look, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You don't need to do this. I can just drop you off wherever you want. No questions asked." Jack laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, Alex, it's way too late for that. Now, pull over before I have to get nasty." I glanced in the rearview mirror, hoping to see another car, but the highway behind us was empty. It was just us, the rain, and miles of dark road ahead. Making a split-second decision, I jerked the wheel hard to the right. The car swerved violently, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. Jack was thrown against the door, the knife clattering to the floor. "What the hell?" he shouted, scrambling to regain his balance. I didn't respond, too focused on keeping the car under control. We fishtailed for a heart-stopping moment before I managed to straighten out. Jack lunged for the knife, but I was ready. I slammed on the brakes, sending him flying forward. His head hit the dashboard with a sickening thud. For a moment, everything was still. Jack groaned, dazed from the impact. I saw my chance and took it, reaching across him to fling open the passenger door. "Get out!" I yelled, giving him a hard shove. But Jack wasn't going down without a fight. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "You're not getting rid of me that easily," he snarled. We grappled in the confined space, a frenzied tangle of limbs. I felt a sharp pain in my side and realized he'd managed to grab the knife again. Warm blood spread across my shirt. The car, forgotten in our struggle, had begun to drift. We were heading straight for the guardrail. "Stop!" I shouted. "We're going to crash." But Jack was beyond reason. His eyes were wild, filled with a desperate, manic energy. He raised the knife again, aiming for my throat. At the last second, I managed to grab his wrist, deflecting the blow. The knife sliced through the air, embedding itself in the headrest just inches from my ear. The impact with the guardrail came a moment later. The airbags deployed with a deafening bang, filling the car with acrid smoke. My head snapped forward, then back, stars exploding behind my eyes. For a few seconds, all I could hear was a high-pitched ringing. Then, slowly, other sounds filtered in, the hiss of steam from the crumpled hood, the relentless patter of rain, and Jack groaning beside me. I blinked, trying to clear my vision. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks, barely holding together. Through it, I could see the guardrail had given way. Beyond was nothing but darkness, and the distant glimmer of water far below. We were teetering on the edge of a cliff. Jack stirred, pushing himself up. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, but his eyes were clear and filled with fury. "You idiot," he spat. "Look what you've done." I didn't waste time responding. I fumbled for my seatbelt, my fingers clumsy and slow. Jack realized what I was doing and lunged for me again, but the airbag between us hindered his movement. I managed to free myself just as his hands closed around my throat. Gasping, I pushed open my door and half fell, half crawled out of the car. The rain was still coming down in torrents, instantly soaking me to the skin. I staggered to my feet, nearly slipping on the wet pavement. Jack was right behind me, clambering out of the wreckage. "You're not getting away," he yelled, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. I turned to run, but my injured side screamed in protest. I managed only a few steps before stumbling. Jack was on me in an instant, tackling me to the ground. We rolled, grappling and punching, dangerously close to the edge of the cliff. I could feel myself weakening, the loss of blood and the shock of the crash taking their toll. Jack sensed it too, a triumphant gleam in his eye as he pinned me down. "The end of the road, Alex," he sneered, reaching for the knife still clutched in his hand. But he'd made a mistake. In his eagerness to finish me off, he'd let his guard down. With the last of my strength, I brought my knee up hard, catching him in the stomach. Jack's eyes widened in surprise and pain. He doubled over, losing his balance. And then, almost in slow motion, he toppled backward. I watched, horrified, as he fell. His mouth opened in a silent scream, his arms windmilling uselessly. Then he disappeared into the darkness below. For a long moment, I just lay there in the rain, my body aching, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Then, slowly, painfully, I pushed myself to my feet. I limped back to the wreckage of my car, praying that my phone had survived the crash. By some miracle, it had. With shaking hands, I dialed 911. As I waited for help to arrive, watching the flashing lights of emergency vehicles approach in the distance, I couldn't help but replay the night's events in my mind. How quickly things had spiraled out of control. How close I'd come to death. I'd offered a ride to a stranger, thinking I was doing a good deed. Instead, I'd invited a nightmare into my car. As the paramedics loaded me into an ambulance, I made a silent vow. Never again would I pick up a hitchhiker, no matter how desperate they seemed. Some risks, I realized, were just not worth taking. The moment he emerged from the mist, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. His eyes gleamed with an intensity that sent chills down my spine, and his smile, meant to be friendly, seemed more like a predator sizing up its prey. Little did we know, our act of kindness was about to turn our peaceful camping trip into a fight for survival. It was supposed to be a weekend of relaxation and reconnection. My two best friends, Mike and Sarah, and I had planned this camping trip for months. We'd found the perfect spot, a secluded clearing in the Adirondacks, miles from the nearest town or campground. Just us, our tents, and the great outdoors. We arrived Friday afternoon, the late summer sun warm on our backs as we set up camp. Mike, ever the Boy Scout, had insisted on bringing enough gear to survive a small apocalypse. Sarah and I had teased him mercilessly, but as the temperature dropped that evening, we were grateful for the extra sleeping bags and thermal blankets he'd packed. That first night was perfect. We sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. The stars above were impossibly bright, unmarred by city lights. As I sipped my beer and listened to Mike and Sarah's playful banter, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Saturday dawned crisp and clear. We spent the day hiking, marveling at the fall colors just beginning to paint the landscape. By late afternoon, we were pleasantly exhausted, our muscles aching in that satisfying way that comes from a day well spent in nature. We were just settling in for another night around the fire when we heard it, a faint call for help, carried on the wind. At first, we thought we'd imagined it, but then it came again, louder this time. "Hello? Is anyone there? I need help." We exchanged glances, a mix of concern and uncertainty on our faces. "Should we check it out?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. Mike nodded, already reaching for his flashlight. "We can't just ignore it. What if someone's hurt?" I agreed, though a nagging feeling in my gut told me we should stay put. We grabbed our jackets and flashlights and headed in the direction of the voice. The forest was different at night. Shadows danced in the beams of our flashlights, and every snapping twig made us jump. We called out periodically, following the responding voice deeper into the woods. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we found him. He was sitting on a fallen log, his clothes dirty and torn, a small backpack at his feet. As our lights fell on him, he stood, shielding his eyes. "Oh, thank God," he said, his voice filled with relief. "I thought I was going to be out here all night." Up close, he looked to be in his mid-30s, with dark hair and a scruffy beard. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was something oddly polished about him, like an actor playing the role of a lost hiker. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked, always the first to offer help. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. No, I'm fine, just lost. My buddies and I were camping, and I wandered off to take some photos. By the time I realized how far I'd gone, it was getting dark, and I couldn't find my way back." It was a plausible story, but something about it felt off. I couldn't put my finger on what exactly, but years of working as a journalist had honed my bullshit detector, and right now it was pinging loudly. "Where's your camera?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He blinked, thrown off for a moment. "Oh, It's in my backpack. Battery died. Mike, ever the peacemaker, stepped in. Well, the important thing is you're safe now. We've got a camp set up not far from here. Why don't you come back with us? Get warm by the fire, and we can figure out how to get you back to your friends in the morning. The stranger's face lit up. That would be amazing. Thank you so much. I'm Jack, by the way. We introduced ourselves as we began the trek back to our campsite. Jack fell into step beside Sarah, peppering her with questions about our trip and our lives back in the city. She answered enthusiastically, always happy to make a new friend, but I noticed how Jack's eyes darted around constantly, taking in every detail of our surroundings. Back at the camp, Mike stoked the fire while Sarah rummaged through our cooler, pulling out some leftover hot dogs to reheat. Jack sat close to the fire, rubbing his hands together for warmth. So, Jack, I said, settling into my camp chair. Where exactly were you and your friends camping? Maybe we can figure out how to get you back there tomorrow. Jack's smile faltered for just a moment. Oh, you know, I'm not great with directions. Somewhere north of here, I think. To be honest, I was following my friends. They're the outdoorsy types. His vague answer did nothing to quell my unease. I glanced at Mike, hoping he was picking up on the inconsistencies in Jack's story. But he was busy showing our guest how to perfectly roast a hot dog over the open flame. As the night wore on, Jack regaled us with stories of his adventures, rock climbing in Yosemite, surfing in Bali, trekking in Nepal. He was charming and funny, and I could see Mike and Sarah warming to him. But with each tale, my suspicion grew. His stories were too perfect, too rehearsed, like he was reciting lines from a script. It was well past midnight when we finally turned in. Jack insisted he was fine sleeping by the fire, but Sarah wouldn't hear of it. She offered him the extra sleeping bag in her tent, saying she'd bunk with me for the night. As I zipped up our tent, Sarah whispered, "Isn't Jack great? What are the odds we'd meet someone so interesting out here?" I murmured a non-committal response, not wanting to voice my concerns without proof. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake, listening to the night sounds of the forest, unable to shake the feeling that we'd invited danger into our camp. I must have dozed off eventually because the next thing I knew, Sarah was shaking me awake. The pale light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the tent walls. "Jen, wake up," she hissed. "Something's wrong." I sat up, instantly alert. "What is it?" "Mike's gone," she said, her voice trembling. "And so is Jack." My blood ran cold. We scrambled out of the tent, calling Mike's name. The campsite was eerily quiet. Mike's tent was empty, his sleeping bag still neatly rolled up inside. There was no sign of Jack or his backpack. Maybe they just went for an early morning hike, Sarah suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. I shook my head, my worst fears confirmed. "Sarah, I think we've been played. Jack, I don't think he was who he said he was." Her eyes widened as the implication sank in. But why? What does he want? Before I could answer, we heard a shout from the woods, Mike's voice filled with panic. "Help! Somebody help me!" We took off running towards the sound, our hearts pounding. As we crashed through the underbrush, I caught glimpses of two figures up ahead. Mike, his hands apparently bound behind his back, stumbling forward, and Jack, pushing him along. "Mike!" Sarah screamed. "We're coming!" Jack turned, his face no longer friendly but twisted with anger and desperation. He pulled out a knife, holding it to Mike's throat. "Stay back," he yelled. "Don't come any closer, or I'll kill him." We skidded to a stop, horrified. Mike's eyes were wide with fear, a trickle of blood running down his neck where the knife pressed against his skin. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Jack's eyes darted between us, wild and unpredictable. "I need your car keys, your phones, and all your cash. Now." It hit me then. He wasn't just some random psychopath. He was running from something, or someone. We were just unlucky enough to cross his path. okay? I said, slowly reaching into my pocket for my keys. We'll give you what you want. Just let Mike go. Jack shook his head. No way. He's my insurance. You two are going to take me to your car. Once I'm gone, I'll let your friend go. Sarah started to protest more, but I grabbed her arm, silencing her with a look. We had to play this smart. What followed was a tense journey through the woods, Jack keeping Mike at knife point while Sarah and I led the way. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. As we neared the parking area, I saw our chance. A group of early morning hikers was just getting out of their car. Jack saw them too and hesitated, momentarily distracted. In that split second, Mike acted. He threw his head back, catching Jack in the face. The knife clattered to the ground as Jack stumbled backward. "Run!" Mike yelled. We didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted towards the hikers, shouting for help. Behind us, I heard Jack curse, and the sound of retreating footsteps as he fled into the woods. The hikers, seeing our panic, immediately called 911. Within hours, the quiet forest was swarming with police and park rangers. They found Jack's backpack abandoned in the woods, containing fake IDs and a large amount of cash. As it turned out, he was a fugitive wanted in 3 states for a string of violent robberies. As we gave our statements to the police, I couldn't help but think how differently things could have turned out. Our peaceful camping trip had turned into a nightmare, all because we'd tried to help a stranger in need. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at shadows, always looking over my shoulder. The forest, once a place of solace and adventure, now seemed full of hidden dangers. We never went back to that campsite, but the experience left an indelible mark on all of us. It taught us that while kindness is important, so is trusting your instincts. Sometimes, the real danger isn't in the dark woods or the wild animals, but in the strangers we meet along the way. The moment I saw him slip that pill into Mrs. Johnson's cup, I knew this wasn't just another quiet night at Sunset Grove Nursing Home. What I witnessed in the next few hours would haunt me for the rest of my life and force me to confront the darkest side of human nature. I'd been working the night shift at Sunset Grove for about 6 months. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid the bills while I finished my nursing degree. Most nights were uneventful, just me, a handful of other staff, and our elderly residents sleeping peacefully. That night started like any other. I clocked in at 11 p.m., exchanged a few words with the day shift nurse, and began my rounds. The halls were quiet, save for the soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional snore from behind closed doors. It was around 2 a.m. when I first noticed him, a man I'd never seen before, dressed in scrubs that looked a little too new. He was standing at the nurse's station, rifling through some papers. "Can I help you?" I asked, approaching cautiously. He looked up, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Oh, hey there. I'm Mark. Just started tonight. Still trying to find my way around, you know." Something about him set me on edge. Maybe it was the way his eyes darted around, never quite meeting mine. Or maybe it was the slight tremor in his hands as he shuffled the papers. "I didn't know we had any new hires," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Let me see your ID badge." Mark's smile faltered for a moment. "Oh, they haven't given me one yet. Said it would be ready tomorrow." Alarm bells were ringing in my head, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe I was just being paranoid. "Well, why don't you come with me?" I suggested. "I can show you around, introduce you to our residents." Mark hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, that'd be great." As we walked down the hall, I discreetly texted my supervisor. Something wasn't right, and I wanted backup. We stopped at Mrs. Johnson's room first. She was one of our more lucid residents, always up for a chat, even in the middle of the night. "Mrs. J, you awake?" I called softly as we entered. She stirred, blinking sleepily at us. "Oh, hello, dear. Is it time for my medicine already?" I shook my head. "Not yet, Mrs. J." I just wanted to introduce you to Mark. He's new here." Mark stepped forward, that same unsettling smile on his face. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Johnson. How about I get you some water?" Before I could object, he'd grabbed the cup from her bedside table and stepped into the small attached bathroom. I heard the tap run for a moment. Then he returned with the filled cup. As he handed it to Mrs. Johnson, I saw it, a quick movement, so fast I almost missed it. Mark's hand hovered over the cup for a split second, and something small and white dropped into the water. My heart started racing. Did I really just see what I thought I saw? "Mrs. Johnson," I said quickly, "why don't you wait on that water? I'll bring you fresh cup in a bit." Mark's head snapped towards me, his eyes narrowing. He knew I'd seen. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then Mark bolted, shoving past me and out into the hall. I didn't hesitate. I ran after him, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor. "Stop," I yelled. "Security." Mark was fast, but I knew the layout of the nursing home better than he did. As he rounded a corner, I cut through a patient's room, emerging in front of him. He skidded to a halt, his eyes wild. "You don't understand," he panted. "I have to do this. They'll kill me if I don't." "Who?" I demanded. "Who's making you do this?" But Mark didn't answer. Instead, he charged at me, his shoulder catching me in the stomach. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I stumbled backward. As I gasped for breath, Mark took off again. I could hear his footsteps echoing down the hall. Forcing myself to my feet, I gave chase once more. My lungs burned, but adrenaline kept me going. I couldn't let him get away, not after what I'd seen. We burst through the emergency exit, alarms blaring behind us. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face, momentarily disorienting me. Mark was heading for the parking lot. I saw a car's headlights flash. He must have hit the remote unlock. "Stop," I yelled again, knowing it was futile. Just as Mark reached for the car door, a figure emerged from the shadows. My supervisor, Angela, her face grim in the harsh glow of the parking lot lights. "Going somewhere?" she asked, her voice cold. Mark froze, looking from Angela to me and back again. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, trying to figure a way out of this. "It's over, Mark," I said, trying to catch my breath. "We saw what you did. The police are on their way." As if on cue, I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder by the second. Mark's shoulders slumped in defeat. "You don't understand," he said again, his voice barely above a whisper. "They have my sister. They said if I didn't do this, they'd kill her." Angela and I exchanged glances. This was bigger than we'd thought. The next few hours passed in a blur. The police arrived, taking Mark into custody. They swept the nursing home, finding a stash of pills hidden in an air vent, a potent cocktail of sedatives and other drugs that could have been lethal to our elderly residents. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light over the parking lot, I sat on the curb, giving my statement to a detective. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving me feeling shaky and exhausted. "You did good, kid," the detective said, closing his notebook. "Looks like you uncovered a pretty sophisticated operation. We've been tracking a group that's been targeting nursing homes across the state, using them to get access to prescription drugs. But this is the first solid lead we've had." I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. "What about Mark's sister?" The detective sighed. "We're looking into it. But between you and me, I think he was just feeding you a line. These guys, they'll say anything to save their own skin." As he walked away, I couldn't shake the image of Mark's face when he talked about his sister. The fear in his eyes had seemed genuine. But then again, so had his act as a new employee. Angela came over, sitting down beside me. "How you holding up?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I keep thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't noticed." She put a hand on my shoulder. "But you did notice. You trusted your instincts." and you probably saved lives tonight. I managed a weak smile. Thanks, I never thought I'd have to deal with something like this. Not here. Angela nodded, her eyes distant. It's a hard lesson to learn, but an important one. Evil can find its way into even the most unexpected places. Our job is to be vigilant, to protect those who can't protect themselves. As we sat there, watching the police cars pull away and the first shift employees arrive, looking confused and concerned, I realized something. This night had changed me. The naive nursing student who'd started this shift was gone, replaced by someone a little harder, a little wiser. I'd always known that being a nurse meant protecting my patients, but now I understood that sometimes that protection meant more than just administering medication or changing bandages. Sometimes it meant being the last line of defense against those who would do harm. As I finally clocked out, the events of the night replaying in my mind, I made a silent vow. I would never again dismiss my instincts, never ignore that little voice that says something isn't right. Because in this line of work, in this world, vigilance could mean the difference between life and death. The sun was fully up now, a new day dawning. But for me, it felt like the end of something. The end of innocence, perhaps. Or maybe the beginning of a deeper understanding of the complexities of human nature and the responsibilities that come with caring for others. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. I would never forget the night I uncovered a sinister plot at Sunset Grove Nursing Home. And I would carry the lessons learned with me for the rest of my career and my life. The moment I saw the strange lights in the sky, I knew this wouldn't be an ordinary nature photography trip. Little did I know, my curiosity would lead me to uncover a government secret that would change my life forever and put me in the crosshairs of forces I couldn't begin to comprehend. My name's Alex, and I've been a freelance nature photographer for the better part of a decade. I've always had a thing for capturing the raw beauty of untouched wilderness. There's something about being alone in nature, surrounded by nothing but trees and sky, that speaks to my soul. This particular trip was supposed to be a simple one. I'd heard about a remote valley in the Rockies that was supposed to be breathtaking during the fall, miles from civilization, untouched by human hands. It sounded perfect. I packed my gear, told my sister I'd be off the grid for a week, and set out. The first couple of days were everything I'd hoped for. The autumn colors were in full swing, painting the landscape in a riot of reds, oranges, and golds. I got some amazing shots of elk grazing in misty meadows and eagles soaring over craggy peaks. It was photographer's paradise. On the third night, I was setting up for some long exposure shots of the night sky. The stars out here were incredible. No light pollution for miles. I had my camera on the tripod, ready to capture the Milky Way, when I saw them. At first, I thought they were stars, but they were moving, not like satellites or planes, but erratically, zigzagging across the sky in impossible patterns. I watched, transfixed, as they danced overhead, my finger automatically pressing the shutter release on my camera. Suddenly, the lights converged, forming a tight cluster, then shot off towards the horizon at an incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, they were gone. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I'd just seen. Part of me wondered if I was hallucinating from too much solitude. But when I checked my camera, there they were. Strange, blurry streaks of light captured in my long exposure shot. Sleep was impossible after that. I spent the rest of the night reviewing the photos, trying to make sense of what I'd captured. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I had to investigate. I packed up my camp and started hiking in the direction the lights had disappeared. It was slow going, the terrain was rough, and I was hauling all my camera gear. But something drove me forward. A mix of curiosity and an inexplicable feeling that I was on the verge of something big. After hours of hiking, I crested a ridge and saw it. Nestled in the valley below was a compound that definitely shouldn't have been there. High fences topped with razor wire surrounded a cluster of nondescript buildings. Guards patrolled the perimeter, and I could see cameras mounted at regular intervals. I dropped to my stomach, crawling forward to the edge of the ridge. Pulling out my telephoto lens, I started snapping pictures. The place looked like a cross between a military base and a research facility. There were no markings, no flags, nothing to indicate who it belonged to. As I watched, a helicopter descended from the sky, landing in a cleared area within the compound. Men in dark suits emerged, escorted by armed guards. They disappeared into one of the buildings. My heart was racing. What was this place? What were they doing out here in the middle of nowhere? I was so engrossed in taking photos that I didn't hear them approach. The first indication I had that I wasn't alone was a voice behind me, cold and commanding. "Don't move. Hands where we can see them." I froze, my camera still in my hands. Slowly, I turned my head. Two men stood there, dressed in black tactical gear, rifles pointed at me. "Stand up, slowly," one of them ordered. I complied, my mind racing. How had they found me? How long had they been watching? "Camera now," the other man said, holding out his hand. I hesitated. That camera contained not just the photos of the compound, but days' worth of nature shots, my livelihood. The man's eyes narrowed. "I won't ask again." Reluctantly, I handed over the camera. The man immediately removed the memory card, pocketing it. "Let's go," the first man said, gesturing with his rifle. "Start walking." They marched me down the ridge towards the compound. As we approached, I could see just how massive the place was. The buildings seemed to extend underground, with only a fraction visible from the surface. We entered through a side gate, passing through multiple security checkpoints. I was searched, my backpack confiscated, and a blindfold placed over my eyes. What followed was a disorienting journey through echoing corridors and humming elevators. When the blindfold was finally removed, I found myself in a stark interrogation room, facing a man in a crisp suit. "Mr. Walker," he said, consulting a file in front of him. "Care to explain what you were doing photographing a restricted government facility?" I swallowed hard. I didn't know it was restricted. I'm a nature photographer. I was just following some strange lights I saw in the sky. The man's eyebrow raised slightly. "Lights in the sky?" I nodded, then launched into an explanation of what I'd seen, hoping honesty might help my situation. As I spoke, I noticed the man's expression change subtly, a mix of concern and, was that fear? When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his voice low. "Mr. Walker, what you've stumbled upon here is a matter of national security. The work we do here is sensitive. I'm sure you understand that we can't simply let you walk out of here with knowledge of this facility's existence." My blood ran cold. "What are you saying? Are you going to kill me?" The man actually chuckled at that. "No, Mr. Walker. We're not in the business of killing innocent civilians. But we do have protocols for situations like this." He stood up, straightening his tie. "You have two options. One, you sign a non-disclosure agreement. We wipe your memory card, and you walk out of here with a stern warning never to return to this area. Two, you become an asset." I blinked, confused. "An asset?" He nodded. "Your skills as a photographer could be useful to us. We occasionally need eyes in places where an obvious government presence would be problematic. In return, we'd provide you with certain protections and, let's call them perks." My mind was reeling. Was he offering me a job as some kind of spy? "What happens if I say no to both?" I asked. His expression hardened. "Then things become considerably more unpleasant for you, Mr. Walker. I'd strongly advise against that option." I sat there, weighing my options. On one hand, I could walk away from this, pretend it never happened. On the other, well, I'd always had a thirst for adventure. And the thought of being privy to whatever secrets this place held was admittedly tempting. "If I become an asset," I said slowly, Do I get to know what this place is? What those lights were? The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. All in due time, Mr. Walker. All in due time. In that moment, I made a decision that would change the course of my life. All right, I said. I'm in. The man nodded, seemingly unsurprised. Welcome aboard, Mr. Walker. Your training begins immediately. As he led me out of the interrogation room and deeper into the facility, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into a world far bigger and more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. The strange lights in the sky, this secret compound, they were just the tip of the iceberg. I thought about my sister, about the life I was leaving behind. Would I ever be able to tell her the truth about where I'd been, what I'd seen? As we passed through a heavy security door, I caught a glimpse of something that made my breath catch in my throat. In a hangar-like room, bathed in ethereal blue light, was a craft unlike anything I'd ever seen. Sleek, silver, and decidedly not of this earth. The man noticed my reaction and smiled enigmatically. Like I said, Mr. Walker, all in due time. The door closed behind us, sealing me into my new life. Whatever came next, one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The moment I saw the glint of the knife in Martha's hand, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. What I thought was a safe haven from the storm had become a trap, and the kindly older couple who had taken me in were anything but ordinary hosts. As the thunder rolled outside, I realized I was in a fight for my life. It had started as a simple road trip. I needed to clear my head after a messy breakup, so I decided to drive cross-country from New York to California. No real plan, just me, my old Honda, and the open road. I was somewhere in the Midwest when the storm hit. The rain came down in sheets, making it nearly impossible to see the road. I squinted through the windshield, my wipers working overtime. That's when I saw it. A faint light in the distance, barely visible through the deluge. As I got closer, I made out the shape of an old farmhouse. I pulled into the driveway, relief washing over me. Maybe they'd let me wait out the storm. I ran to the porch, my clothes soaked through in seconds. The door opened before I could knock, warm light spilling out. "Oh, you poor dear," a woman's voice said. Come in. You'll catch your death out there." I stepped inside, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the light. An older couple stood there, looking at me with concern. The woman, short and plump with gray hair pulled back in a bun, immediately started fussing over me. "Tom," she said to her husband, "fetch a towel for our guest. I'm Martha, dear, and this is my husband, Tom. What's your name?" "Sarah," I replied, my teeth chattering. "I'm so sorry to intrude. I just needed to get off the road for a bit." "Nonsense," Martha said, waving away my apology. "We're happy to help, aren't we, Tom?" Tom nodded, handing me a towel. He was tall and thin, with a weathered face and calloused hands. A farmer's hands. "Storm's supposed to last all night," he said. "You're welcome to stay if you need to." I hesitated. The thought of driving in that weather was daunting, but staying the night with strangers. Martha must have sensed my uncertainty. "We've got a spare room," she said. And I was just about to put on some tea. "Why don't you dry off and join us in the kitchen?" Her kindness won me over. I nodded, gratefully accepting the towel and following Martha to the spare room. It was small but cozy, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and faded floral wallpaper. After changing into dry clothes, I made my way to the kitchen. Martha was at the stove, a kettle whistling cheerfully. Tom sat at the table reading a newspaper. "Feel better, dear?" Martha asked, pouring tea into mismatched mugs. I nodded, settling into a chair. "Much, thank you. You really didn't have to go to all this trouble." "Oh, it's no trouble," Martha said, her eyes twinkling. "We don't get many visitors out here. It's nice to have some company, isn't it, Tom?" Tom grunted in agreement, not looking up from his paper. We chatted as we sipped our tea. Martha was curious about my trip, asking about where I'd been and where I was headed. I found myself opening up, telling her about the breakup, my need to get away. "Oh, you poor thing," Martha clucked sympathetically. "Men can be such brutes. Present company excluded, of course," she added with a wink at Tom. As the night wore on, I began to feel drowsy. The warmth of the kitchen, the sound of the rain outside, and Martha's soothing chatter all conspired to make my eyelids heavy. "I think I'll turn in," I said, stifling a yawn. "Thank you again for your hospitality." "Of course, dear," Martha said. "Sleep well. We'll see you in the morning." I made my way back to the spare room, collapsing onto the bed. As I drifted off, I thought how lucky I was to have found such kind people. I woke with a start, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. It was still dark outside, rain lashing against the windows. Something had woken me, but I wasn't sure what. Then I heard it. Voices, coming from downstairs. Martha and Tom, talking in hushed, urgent tones. Curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the door, opening it a crack. Their voices became clearer. "Perfect timing," Martha was saying. "Young, alone. No one will miss her for days." "I don't know, Martha," Tom replied. "Maybe we should let this one go. We've got enough to last us a while." "Don't be ridiculous," Martha snapped. "You know we can't pass up an opportunity like this. Now go get the supplies. I'll take care of the rest." My blood ran cold. What were they talking about? Surely, they couldn't mean... I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly closed the door, my heart pounding. What should I do? Try to escape? Confront them? Before I could decide, the door opened. Martha stood there, a kitchen knife glinting in her hand. Her kindly expression was gone, replaced by something cold and predatory. "Oh, good, you're awake," she said, her voice chillingly calm. "This will be much easier if you don't struggle." I backed away, my mind racing. "Martha, please. Whatever you're thinking of doing, you don't have to." She laughed, a harsh sound that bore no resemblance to her earlier warm chuckle. "Oh, but we do, dear. You see, Tom and I have specific needs, and you're going to help us meet them." I glanced around frantically, looking for a weapon, an escape route, anything. The window was my only option. Without thinking, I lunged for it, my fingers scrambling at the latch. Martha moved with surprising speed for her age. I felt a sharp pain in my arm as the knife grazed me. Warm blood trickled down my skin, but adrenaline kept me moving. The window finally gave way, and I tumbled out onto the roof of the porch. Rain pelted me as I scrambled to my feet, nearly slipping on the wet shingles. "Tom," I heard Martha shriek. "She's getting away." I didn't wait to hear more. I made my way to the edge of the roof and jumped, hitting the muddy ground hard. Pain shot through my ankle, but I forced myself up, limping towards my car. The keys. Where were my keys? I patted my pockets frantically, realizing with horror that I'd left them in my other pants, the ones drying in the spare room. A figure loomed out of the darkness. Tom, holding an axe. "Now, Sarah," he said, his voice eerily calm. "Let's not make this any harder than it needs to be." I backed away, my mind racing. The barn. Maybe I could hide there, find a weapon. I turned and ran, ignoring the pain in my ankle. The barn door was heavy, but desperation gave me strength. I slipped inside, blinking as my eyes adjusted to the gloom. The smell hit me first, a coppery scent that turned my stomach. As my vision cleared, I saw why. Hooks hung from the ceiling, some bearing what looked horribly like human remains. Tables lined the walls, covered in knives and saws. This wasn't a barn, it was a slaughterhouse. I clapped a hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to vomit. How many people had Martha and Tom lured here? How long had they been doing this? The barn door creaked open. I ducked behind a stack of crates and trying to control my breathing. "Sarah?" Martha's sing-song voice called out. Come out, wherever you are. You're only making this worse for yourself." I looked around desperately for a weapon. My hand closed around something cold and metal, a rusty pitchfork. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Footsteps approached my hiding spot. I gripped the pitchfork tightly, my palms sweaty. Just as Martha rounded the corner, I sprang up, swinging the pitchfork with all my might. Martha's eyes widened in surprise as the pitchfork connected with her chest. She stumbled backward, dropping the knife. I didn't wait to see if she'd get up. I ran, bursting out of the barn and into the rain. Tom was nowhere to be seen. My car was still in the driveway, tantalizingly close. But without the keys, it was useless. An engine roared to life nearby. Tom's truck. He must have gone to get it while Martha searched the barn. I had seconds to decide. The woods. It was my only chance. I plunged into the tree line just as headlights swept across the yard. Tom's angry shouts followed me, but I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the leaves above. I had no idea where I was or which direction I'd come from. As the adrenaline wore off, the reality of my situation hit me. I was lost in the woods, injured, with two psychopaths potentially hunting me. My only hope was to find a road, flag down a passing car. I walked for what felt like hours, jumping at every sound. As dawn began to break, I finally heard it. The distant hum of traffic, a highway. Exhausted, bleeding, and muddy, I stumbled onto the shoulder of the road. A trucker took pity on me, calling the police when I told him my story. The authorities found the farmhouse, but Martha and Tom were long gone. The barn yielded evidence of their crimes, at least a dozen victims over the years. As I gave my statement to the detectives, I couldn't help but think about how close I'd come to being another statistic. The kindly older couple, the warm farmhouse. It had all been a facade, hiding something monstrous. I never did finish that road trip to California. Instead, I went home, hugged my family, and thanked whatever luck or divine intervention had allowed me to escape. And I vowed never again to be so trusting of strangers, no matter how harmless they might seem. Because sometimes, the most dangerous predators are the ones who look just like everyone else. The rusted Ferris wheel creaked in the midnight breeze, a haunting reminder of happier times. As I crept through the abandoned amusement park, camera in hand, I never imagined I'd stumble upon a group of squatters with malicious intent. What started as an urban exploration would soon become a fight for survival in a nightmarish playground of shadows and decay. My name's Jake, and I've always been drawn to forgotten places. There's something about abandoned buildings and deserted spaces that speaks to me. Maybe it's the stories they hold, the echoes of lives once lived. Or maybe I'm just a sucker for a good scare. Either way, when I heard about the old Wonderland amusement park on the outskirts of town, I knew I had to check it out. Wonderland had been closed for nearly 2 decades, shut down after a series of accidents and financial troubles. Now it sat rotting on the edge of the city, a monument to broken dreams and forgotten laughter. I arrived just as the sun was setting, parking my car a good distance away to avoid drawing attention. The fence surrounding the park was in disrepair, with several large gaps that made sneaking in a breeze. As I slipped through, the last rays of sunlight painted the decrepit structures in shades of orange and red, like a fever dream of childhood memories. I took my time exploring, snapping photos of rusted roller coasters and crumbling funhouses. The silence was eerie, broken only by the occasional creak of metal or scurry of some small animal. As night fell, I switched on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness and casting long shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. It was nearing midnight when I reached the heart of the park. The carousel stood before me, a grotesque parody of its former self. Paint peeled from wooden horses frozen mid-gallop, their eyes seeming to follow me as I circled the ride. I was lining up a shot when I heard it. Voices, carried on the wind. At first I thought I was imagining things, but as I stood perfectly still, straining my ears, I heard it again. Laughter, rough and mean, coming from the direction of the old arcade. Curiosity overrode caution. I crept towards the sound, keeping my flashlight low to avoid detection. As I got closer, I could make out individual voices, men, at least 3 or 4 of them. The arcade building loomed before me, its once bright facade now a patchwork of broken windows and graffiti. A faint glow emanated from inside, flickering like firelight. I found a window with a missing pane and peered in. What I saw made my blood run cold. 5 men were gathered around a makeshift fire, the flames casting twisted shadows on the walls. They were a rough-looking bunch, all tattoos and dirty clothes. But it wasn't their appearance that scared me. It was what they were doing. One of them, a big guy with a shaved head, was cleaning a gun. Another was sharpening a wicked-looking knife. And spread out on an old arcade cabinet were maps and what looked like blueprints. This wasn't just a group of homeless squatters. This was something far more dangerous. I must have made a noise, a gasp, or a shift of my foot, because suddenly all eyes turned towards my window. For a heartbeat, we just stared at each other, mutual shock freezing us in place. Then all hell broke loose. "Grab him!" the big guy roared, and I took off running. I sprinted through the park, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear them behind me, shouting and crashing through the underbrush. I ducked into the funhouse, hoping to lose them in the maze of mirrors and trick floors. The place was a death trap. Rotted boards gave way under my feet, and shards of broken mirror threatened to slice me open at every turn. But fear drove me forward, the sounds of pursuit growing closer with each passing second. I burst out of the back of the funhouse, gasping for air. The Ferris wheel loomed before me, and a crazy idea formed in my panic-addled brain. I raced for the control booth, praying that 2 decades of neglect hadn't completely destroyed the machinery. By some miracle, the panel sparked to life when I threw the switch. The wheel groaned in protest, but slowly began to turn. I clambered into one of the cars, my hand shaking as I tried to secure the safety bar. Just as the car began to rise, my pursuers emerged from the funhouse. They spotted me immediately, their shouts of anger mixing with the screech of protesting metal. "He's on the wheel," one of them yelled. "Shut it down." I watched in horror as 2 of them ran for the control booth. The car I was in shuddered to a halt, suspended about halfway up the wheel. I was trapped, with nowhere to go but down. The big guy with the shaved head grinned up at me, leveling his gun. "Nowhere to run now, boy," he called. "Why don't you come on down and we can have a nice chat about what you saw?" My mind raced, searching for a way out. The car I was in swayed gently in the breeze, the rusted metal groaning ominously. That's when I noticed the maintenance ladder running up the center of the wheel, if I could reach it. "I'm coming down," I shouted, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Just don't shoot, okay?" The big guy lowered his gun slightly, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Smart mover, kid. Nice and easy now." I made a show of fumbling with the safety bar, all the while gauging the distance to the ladder. It was going to be a hell of a jump, but it was my only chance. Taking a deep breath, I stood up in the car. "I'm really sorry about this," I said. Before they could react, I launched myself towards the ladder. For one heart-stopping moment, I was airborne. Nothing but 40 feet of empty space between me and the ground. Then my hands closed around the cold metal of a rung. The impact sending shockwaves of pain up my arms. Shouts of anger erupted below me, followed by the crack of gunfire. Bullets pinged off the metal around me as I scrambled up the ladder, adrenaline lending me speed I didn't know I possessed. I reached the top of the wheel and looked down. 2 of the men were climbing up after me, while the others spread out below, cutting off any escape routes. There was only one way to go, across the wheel itself. I inched out onto one of the spokes, trying not to look down. The metal was slick with dew, and more than once I nearly lost my footing. I was about halfway across when I heard a shout from below. Light him up, boys. The night exploded in a cacophony of gunfire. Bullets whizzed past me, sparking off the metal of the wheel. I threw myself forward, abandoning any pretense of caution in favor of speed. I reached the other side of the wheel and half climbed, half fell down the maintenance ladder. My pursuers were closing in fast, their angry shouts spurring me on despite the burning in my muscles. My feet hit the ground and I took off running, heading for the perimeter fence. I could see the gap I'd entered through earlier, tantalizingly close. A bullet kicked up dirt by my feet and I zigzagged, trying to present a harder target. The fence was just yards away now. I put on a final burst of speed, my lungs feeling like they were about to burst. I hit the fence at full speed, diving through the gap. Sharp edges caught at my clothes and skin, but I barely felt it. I was through, out of the park and into the overgrown field beyond. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I peeled out onto the road, I caught a glimpse of figures emerging from the park in my rearview mirror. I drove straight to the police station, my story tumbling out in a rush of adrenaline and fear. They were skeptical at first, but the cuts and bruises covering my body lent credence to my tale. A SWAT team raided the park at dawn, but the men were long gone. They found evidence of their camp, along with weapons and plans for what looked like a bank robbery. My photographs, miraculously intact, provided crucial evidence. In the days that followed, as I nursed my injuries and gave statement after statement, I couldn't help but reflect on how quickly a simple urban exploration had turned into a nightmare. The abandoned park, once a source of fascination, now featured prominently in my nightmares. I still explore forgotten places, but now I'm much more cautious, because I learned the hard way that sometimes the most dangerous things lurking in the shadows aren't ghosts or monsters, but flesh and blood humans with malice in their hearts. And in the decaying remains of a forgotten amusement park, I came face to face with the darkest ride of all, the very real threat of human evil. The moment he slid into the back seat of my cab, I knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary fare. His eyes, wild and desperate, met mine in the rearview mirror, and a chill ran down my spine. Little did I know, this late-night pickup would turn into a nightmare ride that would test my will to survive. I've been driving a cab in this city for nearly 15 years. Name's Mike, and I've seen just about everything you can imagine during those long night shifts. Drunks, fighters, lovers, dreamers, they've all sat in my back seat at one point or another. But nothing could have prepared me for that fateful Tuesday night. It was just past 2 a.m., that dead time when the bars have closed, but it's too early for the morning crowd. I was cruising down Fifth Avenue, thinking about calling it a night, when I saw him. He was standing on the corner, arm outstretched, looking like he'd been through hell. His clothes were disheveled, his hair a mess. But it was the look in his eyes that made me hesitate. There was something off about him. Desperate, yeah, but also dangerous. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. He practically threw himself into the back seat. "Drive," he said, his voice ragged. "Just drive." Now, I'm used to people being in a hurry, but something about his tone set off alarm bells in my head. I turned to get a better look at him. "Where to, buddy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around like he expected someone to be chasing him. "Doesn't matter. Just get me out of here." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the meter. This went against every rule in the book. You always get a destination before you start driving. But something, curiosity, stupidity, or maybe a mix of both, made me put the car in drive. As we pulled away from the curb, I noticed his hands were shaking. He kept looking out the back window, his whole body tense. "You okay back there?" I asked, watching him in the rearview mirror. "You're not in some kind of trouble, are you?" He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Trouble? Yeah, you could say that." That's when I saw it, a flash of metal in his hand. My heart nearly stopped. He had a gun. "Listen," he said, his voice low and threatening. I don't want any problems. Just keep driving and do what I say and everything will be fine. Understand? I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. Yeah, I understand. My mind was racing. Who was this guy? A criminal on the run? A madman? And more importantly, what was he going to do with me? We drove in tense silence for a while, heading out of the city. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, hoping to catch the eye of another driver, someone who might notice something was wrong. But the streets were empty. Take the next right, he said suddenly. I did as I was told, turning onto a darker, less traveled road. We were getting into the industrial area now, warehouses and factories looming on either side. Pull over here, he ordered, as we approached a particularly decrepit-looking building. I eased the cab to a stop, my heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. This was it, I thought. This is where he's going to kill me. But instead of pulling the gun on me, he leaned forward, his voice urgent. I need your help. I turned to look at him, confusion mixing with fear. My help? With what? He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. It's my daughter. They took her. I need to get her back. For a moment, I just stared at him, trying to process this sudden turn of events. Who took her? Why don't you go to the police? He shook his head vehemently. No police. They're involved. Corrupt. I can't trust them. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there, to drive away and never look back. But if what he was saying was true, if there really was a kid in danger. Okay, I said slowly. Tell me what's going on. Over the next few minutes, he spilled out a story that sounded like something out of a crime novel. He was an accountant, he said, who had stumbled upon evidence of money laundering within the police department. When he threatened to expose them, they took his daughter as leverage. They're keeping her in there, he said, nodding towards the warehouse. I've been watching the place for days. There's a guard change at 3 a.m. That's our chance to get in. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. 2:55 a.m. Our chance, I repeated. Look, I want to help, but I'm just a cab driver. I'm not cut out for this kind of thing. He fixed me with a desperate look. Please, I can't do this alone. She's only 8 years old. I closed my eyes, knowing I was probably making the biggest mistake of my life. All right, what's the plan? The next few minutes were a blur of whispered instructions and nervous glances at the warehouse. True to his word, at exactly 3 a.m., we saw movement at the side entrance. 2 men exited, lighting up cigarettes as they walked away. Now, he hissed. We slipped out of the cab and across the street, keeping to the shadows. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it would give us away. We reached the door, which the guards had left unlocked. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit and maze-like, stacked high with crates and machinery. We crept through, following the sound of voices. As we rounded a corner, we saw them. 2 men standing guard outside a small office. My companion pulled out his gun, but I grabbed his arm. Wait, I whispered. I've got an idea. I straightened up and walked boldly towards the guards, putting on my best drunk act. Hey fellas, I slowed. I think my cab broke down out front. Can I use your phone? The guards looked at each other, momentarily confused. That split second of distraction was all we needed. My companion burst out from hiding, his gun raised. Don't move. What happened next was chaos. One guard went for his weapon, and shots rang out. I tackled the other one, years of dealing with unruly passengers finally paying off. When the dust settled, both guards were down, and we were rushing into the office. There, huddled in the corner, was a little girl. Her eyes lit up when she saw my companion. Daddy. He scooped her up, holding her tight. It's okay, sweetheart. I've got you. We're going home. But our relief was short-lived. Alarms started blaring, and we could hear shouts in the distance. We've got to go, I said, already moving towards the exit. We ran through the warehouse, the little girl clinging to her father's neck. I could hear footsteps behind us, getting closer. We burst out of a side door and sprinted for my cab. "Go, go, go," my companion yelled as we piled in. I floored it, tires screeching as we peeled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, I could see figures emerging from the warehouse, but we were already turning the corner out of sight. We drove in tense silence for several minutes, all of us breathing hard. Finally, when I was sure we weren't being followed, I spoke up. "Where to now?" My passenger looked down at his daughter, who had fallen asleep in his arms. "Somewhere safe. I've got evidence that'll bring down this whole operation, but I need to get it to the right people." I nodded, an idea forming. "I know a guy, former cop, now works as a PI. If anyone can help, it's him." As we drove towards my friend's office, I couldn't help but marvel at how much my life had changed in just a few short hours. I'd gone from a simple cab driver to, what? An accomplice. A hero. Whatever I was now, I knew one thing for certain. This was going to be one hell of a story to tell during those long night shifts, assuming, of course, I ever drove a cab again after this. We pulled up outside my friend's office just as the sun was starting to rise. As my passengers got out, the man turned to me. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't helped." I shrugged, suddenly feeling awkward. "Just doing my job, getting people where they need to go, you know?" He smiled, and for the first time, I saw the fear and desperation leave his eyes. "Well, you got us exactly where we needed to be." As I watched them walk into the office, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name: fear, excitement, pride. They all swirled together. I'd taken a huge risk tonight, broken probably a dozen laws, but I'd also helped save a little girl and potentially expose a massive conspiracy. I got back in my cab, ready to head home and try to process everything that had happened. As I pulled away from the curb, I couldn't help but smile. In 15 years of driving, I'd never had a fare quite like this. And something told me I never would again. But that was okay. After all, every cab driver has that one story, the one that tops all the others. And boy, did I have a story to tell. The moment I saw the strange symbols carved into the bedroom door, I knew we'd made a terrible mistake. What started as a quaint bed and breakfast getaway had twisted into a nightmare of ancient rituals and dark secrets. As the chanting grew louder from the floor below, I realized we were no longer guests but potential sacrifices. My wife, Sarah, and I had been looking forward to this weekend for months. Both of us were burnt out from our high-stress jobs in the city, and the idea of a quiet getaway in the countryside seemed like the perfect remedy. We'd found the place online, the Willow Creek Inn, a charming Victorian-style bed and breakfast nestled in the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania. The drive out was beautiful, all winding roads and autumn foliage. We arrived just as the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the old house. It was even more picturesque in person, with its wraparound porch and gingerbread trim. An older couple greeted us at the door, all warm smiles and folksy charm. They introduced themselves as Martha and George, the owners and operators of the inn. "Welcome to Willow Creek," Martha said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "We're so glad you could join us." There was something in the way she said it, a hint of eagerness that seemed odd, but I brushed it off. We were probably their only guests. Of course they'd be excited to have us. George carried our bags up to our room, chatting amiably about the history of the house and the surrounding area. The room itself was lovely, all antique furniture and handmade quilts. It was exactly the kind of rustic charm we'd been hoping for. "Dinner will be served at 7. Martha called up the stairs. "We hope you'll join us. We so rarely get to entertain these days." Sarah and I freshened up and headed down to the dining room. The table was set with fine china and silver, far fancier than I'd expected for a casual country inn. Martha had prepared a feast: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables from their garden. It was all delicious, but there was something off about the flavors. Spices I couldn't quite place. As we ate, George regaled us with stories about the area's history. He seemed particularly interested in the old pagan traditions that had once been practiced in these hills. Fascinating stuff, he said, his eyes gleaming in the candlelight. The old ways, the old gods. Some folks around here still keep to them, you know. I noticed Sarah shifting uncomfortably in her seat. She'd always been more sensitive to these things than me, picking up on undercurrents I often missed. After dinner, Martha insisted on serving us tea in the parlor. The china cups clinked delicately as she poured, her movements almost ritualistic in their precision. A special blend, she said, smiling. An old family recipe. It'll help you sleep. The tea had a bitter, herbal taste that lingered on the tongue. Almost immediately, I felt a wave of drowsiness wash over me. Sarah's eyelids were drooping too, her head nodding forward. "Oh my," Martha cooed. "Looks like it's time for bed. George, why don't you help our guests up to their room?" The climb up the stairs felt like scaling a mountain. My limbs were heavy, my thoughts fuzzy. I barely remember George helping us into bed, murmuring something that sounded like a prayer or a chant. I woke with a start in the middle of the night, my head pounding and my mouth dry. Sarah was still out cold beside me. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong. That's when I noticed the symbols carved into the door, intricate spirals and runes that seemed to writhe in the dim light. Panic started to set in. I shook Sarah, trying to wake her. "Sarah, come on. We need to go. Now." She stirred groggily, her eyes unfocused. What's going on?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But we need to get out of here." I tried the door, but it was locked. Of course it was. I could hear something now, a low humming coming from downstairs. It sounded like chanting. "The window," Sarah said, her voice tight with fear. I nodded, moving towards it. But as I reached for the latch, I froze. Outside, illuminated by moonlight, were dozens of figures in robes, standing in a circle around the house. They were swaying slightly, their arms raised towards the sky. "Oh God," I breathed. "Sarah, look." She came to stand beside me, her hand clutching mine tightly. "What are they doing?" "I don't know, but I don't think we want to find out." The chanting was growing louder now, more fervent. I could feel a vibration in the air, like static electricity building before a storm. "We need to find another way out," I said, trying to keep my voice calm for Sarah's sake. We searched the room frantically, looking for anything we could use as a weapon or tool. Under the bed, I found an old fire poker. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. Someone was coming. Sarah and I pressed ourselves against the wall beside the door, hearts pounding. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Martha stepped in, her kindly grandmother facade replaced by something ancient and terrifying. Her eyes were solid black, and symbols like the ones on the door glowed faintly on her skin. "It's time, my dears," she said, her voice resonating with an otherworldly power. "The old ones are waiting." I didn't think, I just acted. I swung the fire poker with all my might, catching Martha in the side of the head. She went down with a shriek that was decidedly inhuman. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's hand. We bolted out of the room and down the stairs, the chanting outside reaching a fever pitch. George appeared at the bottom of the stairs, his form seeming to shift and warp in the shadows. "You can't leave," he growled, his voice deepening to an impossible bass. "The ritual has already begun." Sarah, always quicker on her feet than me, grabbed a vase from a side table and hurled it at him. It shattered against his chest, and he stumbled back, more in surprise than pain. We pushed past him and ran for the front door, It was locked, of course, but adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I had. I slammed my shoulder into it once, twice, and on the third try, it burst open. The scene outside was like something out of a nightmare. The robed figures had formed a tight circle around the house, their chanting now a deafening roar. The air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath our feet pulsed like a living thing. The car, Sarah gasped. We need to get to the car. Our rental was parked just beyond the circle of chanters. It might as well have been miles away. On three, I said, gripping Sarah's hand tightly. 1, 2, 3. We ran, charging straight for a gap between two robed figures. They turned towards us, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. Hands reached out to grab us, their touch burning like ice. I swung the fire poker wildly, connecting with robed bodies and outstretched arms. Sarah kicked and clawed, her terror giving her a strength I'd never seen before. Somehow, miraculously, we broke through. We sprinted for the car, the sounds of pursuit close behind. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. The engine roared to life just as the first of the cultists reached us. Pale, distorted faces pressed against the windows, mouths open in silent screams. I floored it, the tires spinning in the gravel before finding purchase. We tore down the driveway, the headlights illuminating more robed figures that seemed to melt away into the darkness as we passed. In the rearview mirror, I could see the old Victorian house, now wreathed in an eerie, pulsing light. We drove for hours, not daring to stop, not even sure where we were going. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we finally pulled over at a truck stop, both of us shaking and on the verge of hysteria. What was that? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, still struggling to process what we'd seen, what we'd escaped from. I don't know. Some kind of cult, I think. God, if we hadn't woken up when we did. Sarah shuddered, leaning into me. Do we go to the police? I laughed, the sound bordering on manic. And tell them what? That we were almost sacrificed to some ancient gods by a bed and breakfast cult. They'd think we were crazy. In the end, we drove straight home, trying to put as much distance between us and Willow Creek as possible. We never spoke about that night to anyone else. Who would believe us? But sometimes, on dark nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I think I can hear the faint echo of that chanting. And I wonder about the old ones, and what might have happened if we hadn't escaped. What might still be waiting, out there in those quiet rolling hills. One thing's for certain, we'll never stay at a bed and breakfast again. Some quaint charms are better left unexplored. The moment I saw her desperate eyes in the security camera feed, I knew this wasn't just another quiet night at the Starlight Hotel. What I uncovered in the next few hours would haunt me for years to come, and force me to confront the darkest aspects of human nature lurking behind the facade of luxury and hospitality. My name's Emily, and I've been working the night shift at the Starlight for about 6 months now. It's a swanky place in downtown Chicago, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Most nights, my biggest challenge is dealing with drunk businessmen who've lost their room keys. But that night was different. It started around 2 a.m. I was at the front desk, scrolling through my phone and trying to stay awake, when I noticed something odd on one of the security monitors. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, was pacing the hallway on the 14th floor. She looked agitated, keeping glancing over her shoulder like she was afraid of something. At first, I thought she might just be locked out of her room. But as I watched, she tried the handle of room 1412, then quickly moved on when it didn't open. She did the same thing at the next door and the next. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. I picked up the phone to call Jerry, our night security guard, but he didn't answer. Probably asleep in the break room again, I thought with a sigh. I debated what to do for a moment. Hotel policy was clear. Staff weren't supposed to leave the front desk unattended. But the woman on the screen looked so scared, so desperate. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. Making a split-second decision, I grabbed the master keycard and headed for the elevators. The ride up to the 14th floor felt like it took forever, my mind racing with possibilities. Was she in danger, running from someone? Or was I overreacting to nothing? The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and I stepped out into the hallway. It was empty now, no sign of the woman I'd seen on the cameras. I walked slowly, my footsteps muffled by the plush carpet, straining my ears for any sound. That's when I heard it, a soft sobbing coming from around the corner. I rushed forward, turning the bend to find the young woman crouched on the floor, her face buried in her hands. "Miss," I said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" She looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear and rimmed with smeared makeup. "Please," she whispered. "Please, you have to help me. They're going to kill me." My heart started racing. "Who's going to kill you? Are you in danger right now?" She nodded frantically, pushing herself to her feet. "They brought me here. I thought it was just a modeling job. But..." She broke off, choking back a sob. I felt a chill run down my spine as I began to piece together what she was saying. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Let's get you somewhere safe and then we can call the police." I started to lead her towards the elevator, but she grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "No, we can't leave. My friend, they still have her. Room 1415. We have to help her." I hesitated. Every instinct was telling me to get this girl out of here, to call the cops and let them handle it. But if there really was another victim... "All right," I said, making another decision I hoped I wouldn't regret. "Stay close to me." We crept down the hallway until we reached room 1415. I pressed my ear to the door but couldn't hear anything. With shaking hands, I swiped the master keycard. The lock clicked open, and I slowly pushed the door. The room was dark, but I could make out two figures on the bed. One was clearly unconscious, sprawled out at an awkward angle. The other was a man, his back to us as he hunched over a laptop. He started to turn at the sound of the door. Without thinking, I grabbed a vase from a nearby table and swung it with all my might. It connected with a sickening crunch, and the man crumpled to the floor. The young woman rushed past me to the bed, shaking her friend. Lizzie, wake up." I checked the pulse of the man on the floor, still alive, just knocked out. Then I moved to examine the girl on the bed. She was breathing, but unresponsive. I noticed needle marks on her arm and felt a surge of anger. "We need to get her out of here," I said. "Can you help me carry her?" Between the two of us, we managed to half carry, half drag the unconscious girl out into the hallway. That's when I heard the elevator ding. Two men stepped out, their eyes widening as they took in the scene. One of them reached into his jacket, and I caught a glimpse of a gun. "Run!" I yelled, pushing the girls towards the emergency stairs. We burst through the stairwell door, the sound of pursuit close behind us. Adrenaline surged through me as we descended the stairs as fast as we could, the unconscious girl a dead weight between us. "Where are we going?" The first girl gasped as we reached the 10th floor landing. I was wondering the same thing. We couldn't go to the lobby. There might be more of them waiting. Then I remembered. The service elevator in the back. "This way," I said, pushing through a door marked "Employees Only." We stumbled down a narrow hallway lined with linen carts and cleaning supplies. I could hear heavy footsteps and angry voices echoing in the stairwell behind us. We reached the service elevator, and I jabbed the call button repeatedly, praying it would arrive quickly. The footsteps were getting closer. Just as our pursuers burst into the hallway, the elevator doors slid open. We tumbled inside, and I hit the button for the basement. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of furious faces and reaching hands. The descent to the basement felt like it took hours, though it was probably only seconds. When the doors opened, we found ourselves in the hotel's laundry room. "Come on," I said, leading them through a maze of industrial washing machines and towering shelves of linens. "There's a door that leads to the alley." We emerged into the cool night air. The sounds of the city, a stark contrast to the tense silence of the hotel. I led them down the alley to where my car was parked in the employee lot. As I fumbled with my keys, I saw headlights at the end of the alley. A black SUV was pulling in, cutting off our escape route. "Get in," I shouted, finally getting the door open. We piled in. The unconscious girl laid across the back seat. I started the engine just as men began pouring out of the SUV. I threw the car into reverse, tires squealing as I backed up faster than I'd ever driven. We shot out of the alley onto the main street, narrowly missing a taxi. For the next 20 minutes, I drove like a maniac through the streets of Chicago, taking random turns and doubling back, constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. Finally, when I was sure we weren't being followed, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. "Okay," I said, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. "I think we're safe for now. Let's call the police." As we waited for the cops to arrive, the girl, whose name I learned was Amy, told me her story. She and her friend Lizzie had answered an ad for models, thinking it was their big break. Instead, they'd been drugged and brought to the hotel, where they were to be sold to the highest bidder. When the police finally showed up, it was like a dam breaking. I told them everything, what I'd seen on the security cameras, what I'd found in the hotel room, our harrowing escape. They took Amy and Lizzie to the hospital and asked me to come to the station to give a formal statement. As I sat in the harsh, fluorescent light of the police station, the events of the night replaying in my mind, I realized how close we'd come to disaster. If I hadn't noticed Amy on the security feed, if I'd followed protocol and stayed at my desk, I shuddered to think what might have happened. The detectives told me later that my actions had helped them bust a major human trafficking ring. The men at the hotel were arrested, and more victims were rescued from other locations. I never went back to work at the Starlight. The memories of that night were too intense, too horrifying. Instead, I started volunteering at a women's shelter, trying to help other victims of trafficking. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I still see Amy's desperate eyes in my mind. I hear the echo of footsteps in the stairwell, feel the rush of adrenaline as we fled into the night. But I also remember the look of relief on her face when she realized she was finally safe. And I know that no matter how terrifying that night was, I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Because sometimes, being a hero doesn't mean wearing a cape or having superpowers. Sometimes, it just means being observant, trusting your instincts, and having the courage to act when others are in need. The moment I heard the first gunshot echo through the mountains, I knew our hiking trip had taken a deadly turn. What started as a peaceful escape into nature quickly became a terrifying fight for survival against an unseen enemy. As we huddled in the abandoned cabin, I realized that the real danger wasn't the wilderness around us, but the darkness within our fellow man. My name's Alex, and I've always been an outdoors enthusiast. There's something about leaving the noise and chaos of the city behind that speaks to my soul. So when my friends Jake and Sarah suggested a weekend hiking trip in the Rockies, I jumped at the chance. We'd been planning this trip for months, poring over maps and trail guides, making sure we had all the right gear. The weather forecast was perfect. Clear skies and mild temperatures. It should have been the perfect getaway. We set out early Friday morning, the air crisp and full of promise. The trail we'd chosen was challenging but not too difficult, winding through dense forests and along crystal-clear streams. By late afternoon, we'd made good progress, our muscles pleasantly sore from the exertion. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, we started looking for a good spot to make camp. That's when Jake spotted it, an old cabin nestled in a small clearing. "Hey, check it out," he called, pointing through the trees. Maybe we could stay there for the night instead of setting up the tents. Sarah and I exchanged glances. It wasn't part of the plan, but the idea of a solid roof over our heads was tempting. "I don't know," Sarah said, hesitation clear in her voice. What if someone lives there? I shrugged. Only one way to find out. We approached the cabin cautiously. It was small and weathered, the wood gray with age, the windows were dark, and there was no sign of recent activity around it. I knocked on the door, more out of habit than expectation. When there was no response, I tried the handle. To our surprise, it opened easily. The interior was dusty and clearly long abandoned. There was a small wood stove in one corner, a rickety table with 2 chairs, and a set of bunk beds built into the wall. "Looks like no one's been here in years," Jake said, running a finger through the thick layer of dust on the table. We debated briefly but ultimately decided to stay. It would be more comfortable than our tents, and there was something exciting about spending the night in this forgotten piece of history. We cleaned up a bit, started a fire in the wood stove and glass, and settled in for the night. As we sat around the table, sharing stories and laughing, I remember thinking how perfect everything was. I woke sometime in the middle of the night to the sound of voices. At first I thought I was dreaming, but as I became more alert, I realized they were coming from outside. I nudged Jake, who was sleeping in the bunk below me. "Hey," I whispered. "Do you hear that?" He listened for a moment, then nodded, his eyes wide in the darkness. We woke Sarah, and the 3 of us crept to the window, peering out into the moonlit clearing. There were 3 men out there, dressed in dark clothing. They were arguing about something, their voices low but intense. One of them was gesturing angrily towards the forest. "We need to get out of here," the man was saying. "The cops will be all over this area by morning." My blood ran cold. Cops? What had these men done? Suddenly, one of them turned towards the cabin. We ducked down, but not fast enough. "Hey," the man shouted. "There's someone in there." Everything happened so fast after that. We heard them approaching the cabin, their footsteps heavy on the wooden porch. "Open up," one of them yelled, pounding on the door. We looked at each other, panic clear on all our faces. What should we do? The decision was made for us when the door burst open, splintering around the lock. 3 men rushed in, 2 of them brandishing guns. Well, the one in front said, his eyes cold as he surveyed us. "What do we have here?" "We're just hikers," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We found this cabin abandoned. We didn't mean to intrude." The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Bit of bad luck for you then. Wrong place, wrong time." One of the others, a nervous-looking guy with a scraggly beard, spoke up. "We gotta get rid of them, Joe. They've seen us." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Get rid of us? What had we stumbled into? Joe, apparently the leader, seemed to consider for a moment. "Tie them up," he finally said. "We'll figure out what to do with them later." They used rope from our own backpacks to bind our hands and feet, then shoved us into the corner of the cabin. As they did, I caught a glimpse of what they were carrying. Duffel bags that clinked with what sounded like metal. The 3 men huddled by the door, speaking in low voices. I strained to hear what they were saying. "Bank job went south. Killed a guard. Whole state's gonna be looking for us." I exchanged glances with Jake and Sarah. We'd stumbled into the hideout of bank robbers, possibly murderers. For the next few hours, we sat there in terrified silence, watching as the men argued and paced. They were clearly on edge, jumping at every sound from the forest outside. As dawn began to break, we heard a new sound, the distant thrum of helicopter rotors. The men panicked. "They found us," the nervous one yelled. "Shut up," Joe snapped. He turned to us, his eyes wild. "Looks like your luck's run out, hikers." He raised his gun, and I closed my eyes, certain this was the end. But then, several things happened at once. Sarah, who had been quietly working at her bonds, suddenly broke free and tackled the nervous guy. In the confusion, Jake managed to kick Joe's legs out from under him. The gun went off, the shot deafeningly loud in the small cabin, but it went wide, splintering the wood above our heads. I threw myself at the third man, using my bound hands like a club. We went down in a tangle of limbs, fighting desperately. The next few minutes were chaos. Somehow, in the scuffle, Jake got hold of one of the guns. "Freeze," he yelled, his voice shaking but determined. The men, realizing they were outmatched, raised their hands slowly. "Sarah," Jake said, not taking his eyes off the robbers, "see if you can find something to tie them up with." Using the robbers' own rope, we managed to secure them. Just as we finished, we heard voices outside. "This is the police. Come out with your hands up." The relief I felt in that moment was indescribable. We called out, explaining the situation, and soon the cabin was swarming with state troopers and FBI agents. As it turned out, the men had robbed a bank 2 states over, killing a security guard in the process. They'd fled into the mountains, hoping to lose any pursuit. The next few hours were a blur of statements and questions. We were hailed as heroes for our part in capturing the robbers, but honestly, I just felt lucky to be alive. As we were finally cleared to leave, one of the FBI agents approached us. "You folks were incredibly brave," he said, "but also incredibly lucky. Things could have gone very differently." I nodded, the reality of what we've been through finally starting to sink in. "Believe me, I know." We didn't finish our hiking trip. Instead, we checked into a hotel in the nearest town. All of us too shaken to consider going back into the wilderness just yet. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about how quickly everything had changed. We'd gone from a peaceful hiking trip to being captives, then inadvertent heroes, all in the space of a few hours. I thought about the abandoned cabin, which had seemed so quaint and harmless when we first found it. I thought about the robbers and how desperation had driven them to such violent acts. And I thought about how thin the veneer of civilization really is. How quickly things can turn dangerous when you least expect it. We still go hiking, the 3 of us. But now we're more cautious, more aware of our surroundings. And we always stick to designated campgrounds. Because sometimes, the most dangerous things in the wilderness aren't the animals or the elements. Sometimes, the real danger comes from where you least expect it, from your fellow human beings. The moment I saw him dragging that heavy trash bag to his car at 3 a.m., I knew something was terribly wrong. What started as innocent curiosity about my new neighbor quickly spiraled into a dangerous game of cat and mouse, where the stakes were life and death. Little did I know, my quiet suburban life was about to be turned upside down by the secrets lurking next door. I've always been a light sleeper, so when the sound of a car door slamming jolted me awake in the middle of the night, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was seeing my new neighbor, John, struggling with a large black trash bag in his driveway at such an odd hour. I'd met John a few weeks earlier when he moved in. He seemed nice enough, mid-30s, clean-cut, always with a ready smile and a wave. But something about him had always seemed a bit off. I couldn't put my finger on it. But there was a tension behind his eyes that didn't match his friendly demeanor. Watching him from my bedroom window, I saw him heave the bag into his trunk, then quickly glance around before getting into his car and driving off. The whole scene sent a chill down my spine. What could be in a bag that size that needed to be disposed of so secretly? I tried to go back to sleep, but my mind kept racing with possibilities, each more sinister than the last. By the time my alarm went off for work, I was exhausted and on edge. Over the next few days, I found myself paying closer attention to John's comings and goings. I noticed he kept irregular hours, sometimes leaving in the middle of the night and not returning until late the next day. There were never any visitors to his house, no friends or family dropping by. One evening, as I was taking out my own trash, I saw John in his garage. He was cleaning out his car, and I decided to seize the opportunity to satisfy my growing curiosity. "Hey there, neighbor," I called out, trying to keep my voice casual. "How are you settling in?" John looked up, startled. For a split second, I saw something flash in his eyes, fear, anger. but it was quickly replaced by his usual friendly smile. "Oh, hey, yeah, everything's great, just doing a bit of cleaning." I nodded, noticing how he subtly shifted his body to block my view of the car's interior. "Must be nice to have a garage. Mine's so full of junk I can barely fit my car in there." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "Yeah, it's pretty handy. Listen, I've got to run some errands. Nice chatting with you." And with that, he quickly closed the garage door, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. That night, I couldn't sleep. The encounter in the garage had only intensified my suspicions. I found myself drawn to the window, watching John's house for any sign of activity. Around midnight, I saw him leave again, this time carrying a duffel bag. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and car keys and followed him. John drove for about an hour, heading out of the suburbs and into a more rural area. I kept a safe distance behind, my heart pounding with every turn. Finally, he pulled off onto a dirt road that led into a dense forest. I parked my car at the entrance to the road and continued on foot, using the flashlight on my phone to guide me. The sounds of the forest at night were eerie. The rustle of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl. But scarier than any of that was the thought of what I might find at the end of this road. After about 10 minutes of walking, I saw a clearing up ahead. John's car was parked there, and I could see the beam of a flashlight moving around. I crouched behind a large tree, peering out into the clearing. What I saw made my blood run cold. John was digging a hole, the duffel bag lying open beside him. And inside the bag, I could see what looked horribly like human hair. My hands shaking, I raised my phone to take a picture. But in my nervousness, I forgot to turn off the flash. The clearing lit up for a split second, and John's head snapped up, looking directly at me. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew I was in serious danger. "Who's there?" he shouted, dropping the shovel and reaching into his jacket. I didn't wait to see what he was reaching for. I turned and ran, branches whipping at my face as I tore through the underbrush. I could hear John crashing through the forest behind me, getting closer with every second. My lungs were burning, my legs aching, but pure terror kept me going. I burst out onto the dirt road, my car just visible in the distance. But as I ran towards it, I heard the roar of an engine behind me. John had gotten to his car first. Headlights illuminated the road, and I dove into the ditch beside it, praying he hadn't seen me. The car sped past, and for a moment I thought I was safe. But then I heard the screech of brakes and the sound of a car door slamming. "I know you're out here," John's voice echoed through the night. "You can't hide forever." I lay there in the ditch, barely daring to breathe, leaves and twigs poking into my skin. I could hear John moving up and down the road, searching for me. Slowly, carefully, I began to inch my way through the ditch, heading towards my car. It felt like hours, though it was probably only minutes before I finally reached it. I could still hear John searching, but his voice was farther away now. Taking a deep breath, I made a run for it, yanking open my car door and throwing myself inside. The engine roared to life, and I peeled out onto the road, gravel spraying behind me. In my rearview mirror, I saw John running towards his car, but I had a head start. I drove like a maniac, taking random turns, constantly checking to make sure I wasn't being followed. It wasn't until I was back in familiar territory that I finally allowed myself to relax slightly. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. What had I just witnessed? What was I going to do? I spent the rest of the night pacing my living room, jumping at every sound. When morning finally came, I called in sick to work and went straight to the police station. The detective who took my statement listened patiently, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. "So let me get this straight," he said. "You followed your neighbor into the woods in the middle of the night because you thought he was acting suspiciously." Put that way, it did sound a bit crazy. But I persisted, showing him the blurry photo I'd managed to take. It wasn't much, just a dark shape that could have been a bag, and the vague outline of a person digging. "Look," the detective said with a sigh. "We'll look into it. But without more concrete evidence, there's not much we can do. In the meantime, I'd advise you to stay away from your neighbor and stop following him around at night. That's dangerous and could be considered stalking." I left the police station feeling frustrated and scared. They clearly didn't believe me, or at least didn't think there was enough evidence to act on. For the next few days, I was a nervous wreck. I kept my curtains drawn, jumped every time I heard a car door, and slept with a kitchen knife by my bed. John acted as if nothing had happened, waving cheerfully whenever he saw me. It was almost a week later when I saw the news report. A body had been found in the woods, not far from where I'd followed John. The victim was a young woman who had been missing for months. I called the police immediately, insisting on speaking to the detective who had taken my statement. This time, they listened. The investigation that followed was like something out of a crime show. Police searched John's house and car, finding evidence that linked him not just to this murder, but to several others across the state. When they came to arrest him, John didn't resist. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked directly at me, standing in my driveway. There was no trace of the friendly neighbor now, just cold, dead eyes that promised revenge. In the months that followed, I was hailed as a hero for helping to catch a serial killer. But it didn't feel heroic. I was plagued by nightmares, constantly looking over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. I ended up moving away, unable to live next door to the house where a killer had planned his gruesome deeds. But no matter where I go, I can't forget the lesson I learned. Sometimes, the most dangerous secrets are hiding in plain sight, right next door. Now, whenever I meet a new neighbor, I can't help but wonder, what are they hiding behind their friendly smile and cheerful wave? Because I know firsthand that sometimes curiosity doesn't just kill the cat. It can put you in the crosshairs of a killer. The moment I saw the townspeople's eyes gleam with an unnatural light, I knew I had stumbled into something far more sinister than a simple car breakdown. What started as an inconvenient pit stop in a quaint rural town quickly spiraled into a fight for survival against an ancient evil that had consumed an entire community. As the sun set on Millbrook, I realized that escaping this nightmare wouldn't be as simple as fixing my car and driving away. It was supposed to be a routine road trip. Just me, my beat-up Corolla, and 300 miles of open highway between me and my sister's wedding. I'd made this drive a dozen times before, always breezing through the stretch of rural backroads without incident. But this time, fate had other plans. The first sign of trouble came about halfway through my journey. A sputtering from under the hood, followed by an ominous plume of smoke. I managed to nurse my ailing vehicle into the next town, a tiny speck on the map called Millbrook. As I coasted into what passed for the town center, I felt a strange sense of unease wash over me. The streets were oddly empty for mid-afternoon, and those few people I did see seemed to pause and stare as I drove by. I chalked it up to the natural curiosity small-town folks have for outsiders, but something about their gazes made my skin crawl. I pulled up to the only garage in town, a weathered building with peeling paint and ancient gas pumps out front. An old man in grease-stained overalls ambled out to meet me, wiping his hands on a rag. "Trouble with your car, miss?" he asked, his voice gravelly. I nodded, popping the hood. "Yeah, started smoking about 10 miles back. Any chance you can take a look?" He peered into the engine compartment, sucking air through his teeth. Looks like your radiator's shot. Gonna take some time to fix. Probably won't have the part till tomorrow at the earliest." My heart sank. Tomorrow? But I need to be in Columbus by tonight. Isn't there any way to speed it up? The old mechanic shook his head slowly. "Afraid not. You're welcome to try the next town over, but that's a good 30 miles. Doubt you'd make it that far in this condition." I sighed, resigning myself to my fate. "All right, I guess I'll have to stay the night. Is there a motel around here?" "Just up the road," he said, pointing. "Can't miss it. Only place in town to stay." As I trudged up the street, overnight bag in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this town. The few people I passed on the sidewalk all gave me the same unnervingly intense stare, their eyes seeming to follow me long after I'd walked by. The motel was a rundown affair, its neon sign flickering weakly in the fading daylight. The clerk at the front desk barely looked at me as he handed over a key, his attention fixed on some point over my shoulder. My room was about what I expected, musty, outdated but serviceable. I tried calling my sister to let her know I'd be late, but my cell phone showed no signal. The room phone was dead. Frustrated and hungry, I decided to venture out in search of food. The only restaurant in town was a small diner across from the garage. As I pushed open the door, the conversations inside abruptly ceased. Every head turned to stare at me, and in the sudden silence, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I took a seat at the counter, acutely aware of the eyes boring into my back. The waitress approached, a plastic smile fixed on her face. "What'll it be, honey?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet. "Just a burger and fries, please," I mumbled, keeping my eyes fixed on the menu. As she turned to put in my order, I heard hushed whispers from the other patrons. Snatches of conversation reached my ears. "Outsider. Almost time. The offering." A chill ran down my spine. What were they talking about? My food arrived quickly, but my appetite had vanished. I forced down a few bites, paid, and hurried back to my motel room. Sleep was elusive that night, my dreams plagued by visions of blank-eyed townspeople and shadowy figures. I woke early the next morning, eager to get my car fixed and get the hell out of Millbrook. But when I reached the garage, it was closed. A handwritten sign on the door read, "Gone fishing. Back tomorrow." Panic started to set in. I needed to leave. Now, something was very wrong in this town, and every instinct was screaming at me to run. I started walking, figuring I'd rather take my chances on the highway than spend another night here. But as I reached the town limits, I found the road blocked by a police cruiser. The officer inside gave me that same unnervingly blank stare I'd seen on everyone else. "Road's closed," he said flatly. "Washout from the storm last night. No one in or out until it's fixed." But there hadn't been a storm. I opened my mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me cold. There was something inhuman in that gaze, a hunger that sent ice through my veins. I retreated back into town, my mind racing. I needed to find a way out. But how? As I walked, I noticed the townspeople gathering in the square. They moved with an eerie synchronicity, as if guided by some unseen force. Curiosity overcame caution, and I crept closer, hiding behind a parked car to watch. The crowd formed a circle, and in the center stood the old mechanic from yesterday. But he looked different now, younger somehow, his back straight and his eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. "Brothers and sisters," he intoned, his voice carrying easily across the square. "The time of the offering is upon us once again. Our guest has arrived, just as the prophecy foretold." A chill ran through me as I realized he was talking about me. "Tonight, as the moon reaches its zenith, we shall complete the ritual, our Lord will feast, and our town shall prosper for another generation." The crowd erupted in cheers, their faces twisted in ecstatic fervor. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of sick joke or shared delusion. But as I turned to run, I found my path blocked. The waitress from the diner stood there, that same plastic smile on her face. "Going somewhere, honey?" she asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I tried to push past her, but her grip on my arm was inhumanly strong. Others approached, surrounding me. Their eyes gleamed with that unnatural light I'd seen before. And now I understood its source. Whatever dark power held this town in its grip had taken root in these people long ago. They dragged me to the center of the square, where the old mechanic, or whatever he truly was, waited. Up close, I could see that his eyes were completely black, like pools of oil. "Welcome, child," he said, his voice resonating with power. "You have been chosen for a great honor. Your sacrifice will ensure our prosperity for years to come." I struggled against my captors, but it was useless. They were too strong, too many. As the sun began to set, they led me to a stone altar that had been hidden beneath a top. Ancient symbols were carved into its surface, symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. The townspeople began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, their voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm. The old mechanic produced a wicked-looking knife, its blade gleaming in the fading light. Just as all hope seemed lost, inspiration struck. They had taken my phone and car keys, but they hadn't found the small canister of pepper spray I kept on my keychain. With my last ounce of strength, I wrenched my arm free and grabbed it. I sprayed wildly, catching the mechanic full in the face. He screamed, a sound no human throat should be able to make, and staggered back. In the ensuing chaos, I managed to break free. I ran like I'd never run before, not daring to look back. I could hear them pursuing, their inhuman shrieks echoing through the night. Somehow, I made it to the edge of town. The police cruiser was gone, the road clear. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. When I finally couldn't run anymore, I collapsed by the side of the road, gasping for air. In the distance, I could see headlights approaching. I waved frantically, praying it wasn't someone from Millbrook. To my immense relief, it was a state trooper. He listened to my wild story with growing concern, then called for backup. By dawn, the town was swarming with police and FBI agents. But Millbrook held one final surprise. As the authorities searched the town, they found it completely abandoned. Houses stood empty, as if the residents had simply vanished into thin air. The only sign that anyone had ever lived there was a strange symbol carved into the base of the stone altar. A symbol that matched the one found at several other abandoned towns across the country over the past century. The official report chalked it up to mass hysteria and some kind of toxic gas leak. But I know the truth. Sometimes, evil takes root in the most unassuming places. And sometimes, the most terrifying monsters are the ones hiding behind friendly smiles and small-town charm. I still drive cross-country sometimes, but now, I stick to the main highways. And if my car ever breaks down again, I think I'll take my chances with walking. The moment I saw the classified document sprawled across the executive's desk, I knew my routine night shift had just become a fight for survival. What started as a simple job cleaning offices after hours quickly spiraled into a heart-pounding game of cat and mouse through the corporate maze. As the sound of footsteps echoed through the empty halls, I realized that my mop and bucket wouldn't be enough to save me from the dangerous men determined to keep their secrets buried. My name's Carlos, and I've been working as a night janitor at Apex Industries for the past 3 years. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills and lets me attend community college during the day. Most nights, it's just me, my cleaning cart, and 20 floors of empty offices. I've gotten used to the eerie quiet, the way my footsteps echo in the deserted hallways. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. It started like any other shift. I arrived at 10 p.m., changed into my uniform, and began my usual rounds. Floor by floor, I worked my way up the building, emptying trash cans, mopping floors, and wiping down surfaces. By 1 a.m., I had reached the executive floor, the 20th floor, where all the bigwigs had their offices. I was cleaning the CEO's suite when I first noticed something was off. The desk, usually meticulously organized, was a mess of papers and folders. That alone wasn't too strange. Maybe he'd been working late and left in a hurry. But as I moved closer to tidy up, my eyes caught on a phrase that made my blood run cold. Operation Blackout, eyes only. Now, I'm not the type to snoop, but something about those words sent a chill down my spine. Against my better judgment, I leaned in for a closer look. What I saw made my head spin. Classified government documents, detailed plans for what looked like some kind of massive cyber attack. Lists of foreign officials with red X's next to their names. My hands were shaking as I stepped back from the desk. This was big, way bigger than anything I should be involved with. I needed to get out of there, pretend I'd never seen any of it. But just as I turned to leave, I heard the elevator ding. Panic surged through me. Nobody was supposed to be here this late. I looked around frantically for a place to hide, finally ducking behind a large potted plant in the corner of the office. Two men entered the room, their voices low but tense. "Are you sure you left them here?" one asked. "Positive," the other replied. "They have to be here somewhere." I held my breath as they searched the office, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. After what felt like an eternity, one of them spoke again. "They're gone. Someone's been here." "Impossible," the other snapped. "This floor is secure. Nobody has access except..." There was a moment of silence. Then, "The cleaning crew. Check the security footage. Find out who was up here tonight." I didn't wait to hear more. As soon as their footsteps faded, I bolted from my hiding spot. I needed to get out of the building, fast. But as I reached for the elevator button, I hesitated. They'd be watching the security cameras now. If they saw me leave, they'd know it was me. And something told me these weren't the kind of men who'd let a loose end like that go. I made a split-second decision and headed for the stairs instead. 20 floors was a long way down, but it beat getting caught in the elevator. I'd just reached the 18th floor when I heard the stairwell door above me slam open. Voices echoed down, angry and determined. They were coming for me. Panic gave me speed I didn't know I had. I flew down the stairs, taking them 2 and 3 at a time, praying I wouldn't trip. The voices were getting closer, and now I could hear multiple sets of footsteps pounding down after me. At the 10th floor, I burst out of the stairwell and into the maze of cubicles. I needed to throw them off my trail, find somewhere to hide until I could figure out a way out of this nightmare. I ducked under desks, wove between partitions, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear them spreading out, searching methodically. They knew the layout better than I did, and there were more of them. It was only a matter of time before they found me. As I crouched behind a filing cabinet, trying to quiet my breathing, my mind raced. What were those documents? What was Operation Blackout? And why were they willing to hunt down a simple janitor to keep it secret? I didn't have time to dwell on it. Heavy footsteps were approaching my hiding spot. I held my breath, pressing myself as far back into the shadows as I could. A beam from a flashlight swept past, inches from my face. For a heart-stopping moment, I was sure I'd been discovered. But then the light moved on, and the footsteps faded away. I let out a shaky breath, then froze as I felt something vibrate in my pocket. My phone. In my panic, I'd forgotten to silence it. With trembling hands, I pulled it out to see a text from my girlfriend. "Hope work's going okay. See you in the morning." The irony would have been funny if I wasn't terrified for my life. As I went to switch the phone to silent, an idea struck me. I had the non-emergency police number saved in my contacts, a precaution after a string of car break-ins in my neighborhood. If I could just get a message out. Keeping one ear tuned for approaching footsteps, I quickly typed out a text. "Apex Industries, 10th floor, men with guns. Please help." I hit send, then switched the phone to silent and shoved it back in my pocket. Now I just had to stay alive long enough for help to arrive. I started moving again, staying low and quiet. I made it to the other side of the floor, where the break room was located. As I eased the door open, a new plan formed in my mind. The break room had a large window that opened onto a narrow ledge. In daylight, you could see clear across the city from up here. Now, it was a dizzying drop into darkness, but it was also a potential escape route. I opened the window as quietly as I could, wincing at every small squeak. The night air was cool on my face as I leaned out, looking for any possible way down. There was a fire escape on the next building over, maybe 15 feet away, if I could somehow reach it. My planning was cut short by the sound of the break room door opening. I spun around to see one of my pursuers standing there, gun raised. "Don't move," he growled. Time seemed to slow down. I saw his finger tightening on the trigger. In that moment, I made a choice that was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. I threw myself out the window. For one terrifying second, I was in free fall. Then my hands caught the ledge, my body slamming against the side of the building. Pain shot through my arms, but adrenaline kept my grip firm. I could hear shouting from inside, then the sound of more gunshots. Bullets pinged off the brickwork around me, gritting my teeth against the pain and fear. I began to edge along the ledge, towards the fire escape of the neighboring building. It was slow going. Every inch felt like a mile, my arms screaming in protest. I didn't dare look down, focusing instead on the fire escape that seemed impossibly far away. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, my searching hand found the metal railing of the fire escape. With a final surge of strength, I pulled myself over, collapsing onto the graded platform. I allowed myself only a moment's rest before scrambling to my feet and racing down the stairs. I had no idea if they'd follow me across anyways, but I wasn't about to wait and find out. I hit the alley behind the building just as I heard sirens in the distance. The cavalry was coming, but I wasn't out of danger yet. I ran, ignoring the stitch in my side and the burning in my lungs. I didn't stop running until I reached a 24-hour diner several blocks away. As I burst through the doors, the handful of late-night patrons looked up in surprise. I must have been quite a sight, disheveled, out of breath, my uniform dirty and torn. "Please," I gasped to the startled waitress, "I need to use your phone to call the police." The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and FBI agents. I told them everything I'd seen, everything I'd heard. They seemed to take it seriously, especially when I mentioned Operation Blackout. In the days that followed, the story broke wide open. Apex Industries was raided, high-level executives were arrested, and words like treason and domestic terrorism were thrown around in the news. As for me, I was hailed as a hero by some, a troublemaker by others. I had to go into protective custody for a while, but eventually, things calmed down. I went back to school, determined more than ever to make something of myself. Sometimes, late at night, I still have nightmares about that ledge, about the bullets whizzing past my head. But mostly, I think about how one ordinary night, one split-second decision, changed everything. How a simple janitor stumbled into a conspiracy and came out the other side. Life's funny that way. You never know when you might be called upon to be brave, to stand up for what's right. All you can do is hope that when that moment comes, you're ready to rise to the challenge. The moment I saw the first pair of headlights appear in our rearview mirror, I knew our pleasant road trip had taken a sinister turn. What started as a scenic detour through rural backroads quickly spiraled into a heart-pounding chase that would test our wits, our bond, and our will to survive. As the sound of engines grew louder behind us, I realized that sometimes the real monsters aren't found in horror movies, but in the dark hearts of men. My wife, Sarah, and I had been planning this cross-country road trip for months. We'd mapped out all the major attractions, booked our stays, and even created the perfect playlist for those long stretches of highway. But it was a split-second decision to take a shortcut that would change everything. We were somewhere in the middle of nowhere, having veered off the interstate to avoid a massive traffic jam. Our GPS was struggling to find a signal, but I wasn't too worried. The sun was setting, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink, and the winding country road seemed peaceful enough. "You sure you know where we're going, Mike?" Sarah asked, a hint of concern in her voice. I flashed her a confident smile. "Absolutely. We'll be back on the main road in no time. Besides, isn't this view worth it?" She had to agree. The rolling hills and dense forests were a welcome change from the endless monotony of the highway. We drove on in comfortable silence, enjoying the scenery and each other's company. It was nearly dark when we passed through a small town, if you could even call it that. Just a handful of buildings clustered around a single intersection, most of them looking abandoned. The only sign of life was a rundown gas station, its neon sign flickering weakly in the twilight. Maybe we should stop and ask for directions, Sarah suggested. I was about to agree when I noticed a group of men lounging outside the gas station. There was something off about them, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. They watched our car pass with an intensity that felt predatory. "Now, I'm sure we're close," I said, pressing down on the accelerator. "Let's keep going." As we left the town behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following us. It was fully dark now, the road ahead illuminated only by our headlights. We'd been driving for at least an hour since the town, and there was still no sign of the highway. "Mike, I think we're lost," Sarah said, her voice tight with worry. Before I could respond, I saw them. Headlights in the distance behind us, growing larger quickly. Whoever it was, they were driving fast. "It's fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Probably just some local who knows these roads better than we do." But as the vehicle drew closer, I could see it wasn't alone. There were at least 3 sets of headlights now, bearing down on us like a pack of wolves. Sarah turned in her seat, her face pale in the harsh glare. "Mike, they're getting closer. I don't like this." I didn't like it either. Every instinct was screaming at me that this wasn't normal, that we were in danger. I pressed harder on the gas, our old sedan protesting as I pushed it to speeds it wasn't used to. The pursuing vehicles were gaining on us. I could make out the outlines now, pickup trucks, their engines roaring as they closed the distance. "What do they want?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. I shook my head, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I don't know, but we're not stopping to find out." The lead truck was right behind us now. I could see the driver in my rearview mirror, a burly man with a wild beard, grinning like a maniac. He flashed his high beams, the sudden brightness nearly blinding me. That's when the first gunshot rang out. Sarah screamed as our rear windshield exploded, showering us with glass. I swerved, nearly losing control of the car. "Get down," I yelled, and Sarah ducked, covering her head with her arms. More shots followed, pinging off the metal of our car. I zigzagged across the road, trying to make us a harder target, all while scanning desperately for any sign of civilization, any hope of help. "There," Sarah shouted, pointing ahead. Lights. In the distance, I could see the glow of what looked like a small town. If we could just make it there, maybe we'd find help, or at least witnesses to make our pursuers back off. But our car had other ideas. Whether from the strain of the chase or a lucky shot, something under the hood made a terrible grinding noise. Black smoke began pouring from the engine, and I felt our speed dropping. "No, no, no," I muttered, willing the car to keep going. "Come on, just a little further." We were limping now, the trucks behind us closing in for the kill. I could see the town clearly, a collection of houses and buildings surrounding a main street. So close, yet impossibly far. Just as I thought it was over, that we were going to be run off the road, I spotted a narrow dirt path branching off to the right. Without thinking, I yanked the wheel, sending us bouncing down the rough track. Our pursuers, caught by surprise, roared past the turnoff. I killed the headlights, plunging us into darkness as we bumped along the uneven ground. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I admitted, "but hopefully somewhere they can't follow." The path twisted through dense woods, branches scraping against the sides of our car. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood an old barn, its wood gray with age. I cut the engine, and we sat in silence, straining our ears for any sound of pursuit. In the distance, we could hear the revving of engines as our attackers searched for us. "We can't stay here," Sarah whispered. "They'll find us eventually." She was right, of course. But with our car on its last legs and no idea where we were, our options were limited. "Okay," I said, trying to think clearly despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "We'll hide the car in the barn, then we'll head into the woods on foot. Maybe we can circle back to that town we saw." It was a desperate plan, but it was all we had. We pushed the car into the barn, then gathered what supplies we could: a flashlight, a bottle of water, Sarah's pepper spray. As we were about to leave, I spotted an old axe leaning against the wall. I grabbed it, hoping I wouldn't have to use it, but unwilling to leave it behind. We set out into the woods, moving as quietly as we could. The forest was alive with night sounds: the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Every snapping twig made us jump, certain we were about to be discovered. We'd been walking for maybe an hour when we heard it. Voices carried on the wind. They were faint but getting closer. "They're still looking for us," Sarah whispered, her grip on my arm tightening. I nodded grimly. These men, whoever they were, weren't giving up easily. What could we have possibly done to warrant such determined pursuit? We picked up our pace, no longer worrying about stealth. Better to be heard than caught. The voices behind us grew louder, accompanied by the crash of bodies moving through the forest. Suddenly, the trees thinned, and we found ourselves on the edge of a steep ravine. Far below, I could hear the rush of water, a river or large stream. "We're trapped," Sarah said, panic evident in her voice. I looked around frantically, searching for a way out. The drop was too steep to climb down safely, especially in the dark. Going back wasn't an option. I could see flashlight beams dancing between the trees behind us. That's when I spotted it, a fallen tree, spanning the ravine like a natural bridge. It was our only chance. "There," I said, pointing. "We can cross there." Sarah's eyes widened as she saw the makeshift bridge. "Mike, we can't. It's too dangerous." "We don't have a choice," I replied, already moving towards the fallen tree. "It's this, or wait for them to find us." Reluctantly, Sarah followed. The log was wide enough to walk on, but slick with moss and rot. I went first, moving slowly, my arms outstretched for balance. Sarah followed close behind, her breathing quick and shallow. We were about halfway across when I heard a shout. Our pursuers had found us. "There they are!" Gunshots rang out, bullets splintering the wood around us. I turned to see Sarah stumble, crying out in fear. "Keep going," I yelled, reaching back to steady her. "We're almost there." It felt like an eternity, but finally, mercifully, we reached the other side. Without pausing to catch our breath, we plunged back into the forest, the angry shouts of our pursuers fading behind us. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs felt like jelly. When we finally stopped, gasping for air, I realized I could hear something beyond the pounding of my own heart. "Traffic. Do you hear that?" I asked Sarah. She nodded, hope dawning on her face. "A road." We pushed on, following the sound. After another 10 minutes of stumbling through the underbrush, we emerged onto the shoulder of a highway. In the distance, I could see the lights of an approaching truck. Sarah and I looked at each other, relief and exhaustion etched on our faces. Without a word, we stepped out onto the road, waving our arms frantically. The truck slowed, then stopped. The driver, an older man with a kindly face, rolled down his window. "You folks okay?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I shook my head, suddenly feeling the weight of everything we'd been through. "No, we're not. We need help. Please." As we climbed into the truck, I caught one last glimpse of the dark forest behind us. Whatever nightmare we'd stumbled into back there, we'd escaped. But I knew the memory of that terrifying chase would stay with us for a long time to come. Sometimes, the most dangerous detours aren't marked on any map. And sometimes, the real monsters are the ones you never see coming. The moment I heard the floorboard creak upstairs, I knew I wasn't alone in this house. What started as a simple favor for a friend had turned into a night of heart-pounding terror, as I realized that the shadows held secrets far more sinister than I could have imagined. As I huddled in the darkness, straining my ears for any sound of movement, I wondered if I would live to see the morning light. My name's Emily, and I've always prided myself on being level-headed and practical. So when my best friend Sarah asked me to house sit for her wealthy employers while they were on vacation, I didn't think twice about it. A week in a luxurious mansion, getting paid to essentially do nothing. It seemed like a dream gig. The Stevensons' house was everything you'd expect from a successful couple. 3 stories of modern architecture nestled in the hills overlooking the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a state-of-the-art security system, and more rooms than I could count. It was the kind of place that made you feel small, just standing in it. The first couple of days were uneventful. I spent my time exploring the house, lounging by the pool, and binge-watching shows on their massive TV. It was on the 3rd night that things started to feel off. I was in the kitchen, making myself a late-night snack, when I first felt it. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I turned around, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the room was empty. Shaking off the feeling, I chalked it up to being alone in a strange house. But as I made my way back to the guest room, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me. The long hallways seemed darker, the shadows deeper. I found myself quickening my pace, eager to get back to the relative safety of my room. It was just past midnight when I heard it. A soft thud from somewhere upstairs. I sat up in bed, my heart suddenly racing. It could have been anything. The house settling, a book falling off a shelf. But something in my gut told me it wasn't that simple. I debated what to do. The rational part of my brain said to ignore it, to go back to sleep. But curiosity and a nagging sense of responsibility won out. If something was wrong, I needed to check it out. Grabbing my phone for light, I crept out into the hallway. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that seems to amplify every small sound. My bare feet made no noise on the plush carpet as I made my way to the stairs. The second floor was even darker than the first, the moonlight casting strange shadows through the windows. I paused at the top of the stairs, listening intently. For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a floorboard creaking. My blood ran cold. There was someone else in the house. I stood frozen, my mind racing. Should I call the police? Try to find a weapon? Make a run for it? Before I could decide, I heard another noise. Closer this time, like someone trying to move quietly and failing. Panic surged through me. I needed to hide, to find somewhere safe until I could figure out what to do. The master bedroom was just down the hall. It had a lock on the door and a phone I could use to call for help. I inched my way down the hallway, pressing myself against the wall. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the house sounded like approaching footsteps. I was about halfway to the bedroom when I saw it. A figure, silhouetted at the end of the hall. For a heartbeat, we both stood still, staring at each other. Then the figure moved, coming towards me with alarming speed. I didn't think. I just ran. I burst into the master bedroom, slamming the door behind me and fumbling with the lock. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely manage it. But finally I heard the click of the bolt sliding into place. Backing away from the door, I grabbed the landline phone from the bedside table. But when I put it to my ear, my heart sank. The line was dead. A thud against the door made me jump. Whoever was out there, they were trying to get in. The door shuddered under the impact, the wood creaking ominously. It wouldn't hold for long. I looked around frantically for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on a heavy crystal vase on the dresser. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. I grabbed it, the weight reassuring in my hands. The pounding on the door grew more insistent. I could hear wood splintering. Knew it was only a matter of moments before it gave way. I backed into the corner of the room, the vase raised and ready. With a final, thunderous crack, the door burst open. A man stumbled in, his face hidden by a ski mask. He was bigger than me, stronger, but I had surprise and desperation on my side. As he lunged towards me, I swung the vase with all my might. It connected with a sickening thud, and he went down hard. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then I heard voices from downstairs. He wasn't alone. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I ran, out of the bedroom and down the hall. I could hear shouts behind me. Knew they were coming. The stairs were out. They'd catch me for sure. That left only one option. I darted into one of the spare bedrooms, locking the door behind me. The window was my only chance. I threw it open, looking down at the drop below. It was high, too high to jump safely. But there was a ledge running along the side of the house, leading to the balcony of the next room over. Footsteps thundered down the hall. It was now or never. Taking a deep breath, I climbed out onto the ledge. The wind whipped at my clothes as I inched along, pressing myself as close to the wall as I could. Don't look down, I told myself. Just keep moving. I had almost reached the balcony when I heard the window behind me open. One of the intruders had figured out where I'd gone. I forced myself to move faster, my fingers scrabbling for purchase on the smooth exterior of the house. Just as I felt a hand grasp at my ankle, I made a desperate lunge for the balcony railing. For one heart-stopping moment, I thought I'd miscalculated. Then my hands closed around the cold metal, and I pulled myself over. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I raced through the room and out into the hall, taking the stairs two at a time. I could hear them behind me, closing in fast. The front door was so close. If I could just reach it, I'd be out. I'd be safe. But as my hand closed around the doorknob, I felt strong arms wrap around me from behind. Got you, a gruff voice said in my ear. I struggled, kicking and clawing, but it was no use. He was too strong. As he dragged me back into the house, I saw two other men coming down the stairs. One of them was holding his head where I'd hit him with the vase. What should we do with her? The one holding me asked. The man I'd hit stepped forward, pulling off his mask. To my shock, I recognized him. It was Mr. Stevenson, the owner of the house. Hello, Emily, he said, his voice cold. I think it's time we had a chat about what you've seen. My mind reeled. What was going on? Why was Mr. Stevenson breaking into his own house? And what had I seen that was so important? As they led me into the living room, I noticed things I hadn't before. A safe hidden behind a painting now standing open and empty. Stacks of documents on the coffee table. A laptop, its screen glowing with what looked like bank records. You weren't supposed to be here, Mr. Stevenson said, pacing in front of me. Sarah assured us the house would be empty. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Sarah had set me up. But why? I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. What is all this? Mr. Stevenson sighed. It's complicated, Emily. Let's just say that my business dealings aren't always strictly legal. And now, thanks to your unexpected presence, we have a problem. The implication was clear. I knew too much. As I looked at the hard faces of the men around me, I realized with a sinking feeling that they had no intention of letting me leave. But I wasn't going down without a fight. As Mr. Stevenson turned to speak to one of his men, I made my move. I drove my elbow back into the stomach of the man holding me, feeling a rush of satisfaction as he grunted in pain and loosened his grip. I bolted for the door, my fingers fumbling with the lock. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit, but adrenaline and fear lent me speed I didn't know I possessed. I burst out into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. I ran down the long driveway, my bare feet slapping against the pavement. I didn't stop when I reached the road, didn't look back to see if they were following. I just ran. It wasn't until I reached a gas station several miles away that I finally allowed myself to stop. My lungs were burning, my feet bloody and bruised, but I was alive. I was safe. As I used the payphone to call the police, my mind was still reeling from the night's events. I had gone into that house expecting a quiet week of relaxation. Instead, I had uncovered a criminal conspiracy and barely escaped with my life. I learned a lot of lessons that night, about trust, about appearances, about how quickly life can turn upside down. But most of all, I learned that sometimes The most dangerous secrets are hiding in plain sight, right in the houses of the people we think we know. As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, I made a silent vow. No more house-sitting, no more blind trust, and definitely no more midnight explorations. Sometimes, it's better to leave the shadows unexplored.